来啦，坐。您的半拿铁，请慢用。
Caffè Breve, episode 166, recording starts. Hello everyone, I'm Liu Fei. I'm Xiao Lei. Let's get back to today's topic. What are we discussing? I bet you're all surprised. Today we're talking about Baidu's second half. You probably didn't expect that, did you? In our last episode, we originally planned to cover everything, but there was simply too much to get through. We only made it to about 2007. That was the year Baidu truly secured the top spot. Back then, there wasn't a single Chinese internet user who didn't know Baidu, and Robin Li became the undisputed #1 internet mogul. 2007 was also a significant turning point. So, we'll pick up from there and dive into Baidu's second half. Wow. Alright, I hesitated for a moment. It seems like I'm the only one who really enjoys this game.
But that's not important. I'm sure some listeners really enjoy it too. It just depends on the proportion.
No one in the comments section is bringing this up anymore, but I'm just amusing myself. Let's begin. What was it? 8. I still can't remember what 8 refers to. Just try to get a feel for what 8 is. We're entering the first chapter, the bidding controversy, years of conflict. The wheels of fate began to turn. First, something happened at the end of 2007. At that time, Baidu's CFO was Zhang Wang. He joined Baidu from PwC in 2004 and spearheaded Baidu's entire IPO process, making him a huge contributor to the company. On the 27th of December 2007, just as Baidu was about to embark on its IPO journey, on this day in 2008, Baidu's stock price surged past the $400 mark. This was the peak for Chinese concept stocks. Everyone felt they were truly taking off. Tragically, Zhang Wang accidentally drowned in Sanya, Hainan, that very day, at just 40 years old. The unfortunate death of the CFO of such a vital company had a profound impact on Baidu and on Robin Li himself. At the memorial service, Robin Li said, "All of us here remember that there was once a friend among us, someone we all loved and respected in this world." And so began Baidu's year of misfortune. In 2008, Baidu moved into the Baidu building in Shangdi, Beijing. Anyone familiar with Beijing's geography would know that in the northwest, in the Haidian district, there's a place called Shangdi with a subway station. Many internet companies are located there. What's known as XiaoyuzhouFM and Haochangkan are all in that area. The Baidu building was one of the earliest and most prominent campuses built there. Baidu moved in. In the same year, Baidu, true to the saying, "big trees attract the wind," began to face widespread controversy for the first time. While we associate later controversies with post 2016, they actually started in 2008. What was the earliest incident? The Sanlu milk powder scandal? The Sanlu milk powder incident occurred in February 2008. Those who lived through that era might remember it. Many young children, infants, who consumed Sanlu milk powder developed kidney stones. The issue escalated from August to September 2008, and eventually the General Administration of Quality Supervision, Inspection and Quarantine announced that almost all well-known brands Yili, Mengniu, Guangming, Yashili, and others all tested positive for melamine. It even impacted China's dairy product exports at the time. What did this have to do with Baidu? At that time, various news reports about the melamine incident were circulating online. There were revelations. A netizen exposed a cooperation plan from a Beijing advertising company titled Sanlu Group Public Relations Solution Proposal. The document stated, "Sign a 3 million yuan advertising placement agreement with Baidu. And enjoy," and this is crucial. Placing ads is understandable. No issue there. The service of negative news deletion and gaining media discourse power. Additional services. The milk powder business unit has already invested 1.2 million yuan. The group only needs to coordinate another 1.8 million yuan to sign a framework agreement with Baidu. This document was leaked. In simple terms, it was about paying money to get things done, specifically deleting negative information by directly removing search results. According to the original plan, Baidu was in a panic at the time. They quickly issued a statement saying, "We didn't, we aren't, we have already rejected this plan." But then netizens uncovered more. On the 8th of November, 2008, news media reported that Baidu indeed had some internal value-added services. These services weren't available to small advertisers, but key account advertisers did have access to them. This included deleting negative news, enhancing brand reputation, and positively guiding public opinion. It meant that some rankings could be boosted, and even certain links could be directly blocked on the search page. This service plan was written down in black and white. This sparked a heated public debate at the time. It was quite serious, so the official denial couldn't hold up. Yes, they couldn't deny it. Even with their earlier statement, even if they hadn't participated in the Sanlu milk powder incident, was it because the incident became too big that they didn't dare to participate? Had they participated in smaller ones before? This became a point of contention. Subsequently, more media outlets began to scrutinize Baidu's bidding rankings and advertising practices. Xinhua News Agency launched a challenge. On the 12th of November 2008, Xinhua News Agency published an article titled "Fake Information Runs Rampant Online, Is Bidding Ranking the Root Cause?" The article pointed out that when reporters searched for plastic surgery or liposuction and other keywords related to cosmetic surgery on Baidu, almost all the websites appearing on the first page were pay-per-click bidding ranking sites.
I just thought of suction paper perm. It sounds a bit like a beauty treatment, like liposuction. Even more incomprehensible.
Actually, according to relevant regulations, all surgical aesthetic institutions must have a medical institution practice license. Yet, from Baidu's search results homepage, you couldn't find a single one with such a license. Look, if you searched for slot machines on Baidu, a huge number of websites appeared with the entire first page filled with bid ranking results. And gambling machines are products explicitly prohibited from sale by the state.
That reminds me, when we talked about Hot Pot a few episodes ago, wasn't the first business Zhang Yong of Haidilao almost got into buying those gambling-like poker machines? Back then, you had to find obscure information in the classifieds of a newspaper and then go offline to track them down. But now, you can just Baidu it and find them directly. So this chain
just added more avenues for illegal activities and crime. Yes, back in 2008, honestly, regulation wasn't that strict. Later, China Central Television also followed up. Their news program, News 30 Minutes, exposed Baidu's bid ranking scandal for 2 consecutive days on November 15th and 16th, 2008. The program mentioned many cases, including Mr. Li, who searched for a hospital under the General Dining Management and Guarantee Department on Baidu to treat a minor illness that could have been cured for 100 yuan, but ended up spending over 10,000 yuan without success. The top-ranked result for Baidu tumor search was China Anti-Cancer Network. On that website, they found a doctor named Bai Xihe, who claimed affiliations with the CACMS China Academy of Chinese Medical Sciences and the Chinese Medical Association, and other organizational titles. But when reporters followed up, both the CACMS China Academy of Chinese Medical Sciences and the Chinese Medical Association denied that such a person existed within their organizations. If these were just problems with the advertisers themselves, then what came next was truly alarming. You could argue that Baidu's regulatory oversight wasn't strict enough at the time, allowing these advertisers to fish in troubled waters. However, China Central Television reporters' undercover investigation also found that for some websites publishing medical information, individual Baidu staff members not only failed to conduct strict reviews, but even helped them. For example, a sales representative stated, "A few days ago, I had a client who wanted to bid rank a type of capsule. It definitely didn't have a medical license. But another product from the same client did have a license." The sales representative then said, "Photoshop it. Use Photoshop to erase the name, replace it, print it out, and we'll approve it." That is, they were giving advice to help them achieve sales targets. If sales representatives were directly saying this, just imagine, right? And this is just the tip of the iceberg. How big is the iceberg underneath? The controversies surrounding Baidu during this period were rampant. It was a stark contrast to just a few years prior when people talked about Baidu as a representative of Chinese concept stocks, an overwhelmingly positive image in all aspects. The media headlines at the time were not flattering at all. For example, Baidu search ranking, fake doctors, fake medicine ranked first. China Central Television exposes Baidu's bid ranking scandal. The real lie, Baidu search impartiality investigation. Fake medical information just the tip of the iceberg. Baidu bid ranking issues still persist, and many more such news stories. On the 8th of November 2008, Wang Fengchang led 14 individuals from the legal and internet communities to spontaneously form the Internet Anti-Monopoly Alliance. They filed a collective lawsuit against Baidu for violating advertising law, engaging in click fraud, suspected extortionate marketing, and selling prohibited items. This case was dubbed China's first internet anti-monopoly case, dating back to 2008. However, the case was heard in April 2009 by the Beijing First Intermediate People's Court, and a first instance judgment was rendered at the end of the same year, rejecting all of the plaintiffs' claims. So, this alliance and the entire incident, and that was the end of it. But during this same period, there were so many media reports. The most serious, of course, was the China Central Television report, which everyone watched back then. After the first report on Saturday, Baidu's internal team started to panic. They immediately called an emergency national meeting. Managers from regional operations departments returned to headquarters over the weekend to discuss how to handle websites using bid ranking that hadn't provided medical licenses. According to a senior manager from Baidu's operations department, who spoke to the media at the time, 20% of bid ranking generated 80% of the company's revenue. The 80/20 rule was very evident. And within that 20%, the medical industry was the most crucial client. This was an absolutely significant proportion. Many medical websites brought Baidu tens of thousands in daily revenue through bid, ranking each website generated tens of thousands a day. After Baidu's emergency meeting, some senior managers told NetEase Tech that websites without medical licenses would be taken offline by the 18th. Medical advertisers would only be allowed back online after providing proper licenses. At the same time, according to a report, An overseas analyst who had long followed Baidu's business told Sina Tech that medical advertising might account for over 7% of Baidu's overall business, not the 3% Baidu had publicly disclosed. This percentage seemed quite substantial, more than double. It was predicted that this incident would have a considerable impact on Baidu's business. Some netizens also searched and found that the keywords exposed by China Central Television no longer showed ads. They had all made urgent adjustments, but then netizens discovered something else. Baidu did something truly bizarre and inexplicable. On the Baidu News homepage, a large number of news reports appeared with the headline, "Google's impartiality questioned, China Central Television exposes bid ranking." People went to search, thinking China Central Television had not only exposed Baidu but also Google. After searching for a long time, they found nothing. Google didn't even have bid ranking in China.
So where did this report come from? It only had a so-called headline.
Baidu simply changed the headline. This kind of petty cleverness makes you feel like they're both malicious and foolish. What was done at that time wasn't necessarily the will of top management. Perhaps some employees at lower levels were being clever and made some adjustments. You can also see that they might have genuinely charged for similar things before, creating a false impression. This kind of behavior damages your credibility and influence. It's like shooting yourself in the foot. Yes, on the 18th of November 2008, Robin Li officially issued an open letter to all employees. The general gist was that China Central Television's continuous exposure of bid ranking had damaged Baidu's brand image, for which he felt deeply distressed and would take full responsibility. He denied media reports about blocking websites for not paying, stating, "We have never done that, and we never will." After this open letter was released, the media felt it lacked sincerity and was downplaying the seriousness. Moreover, he spent a lot of space emphasizing, "We have been harmed. Your China Central Television report has caused us harm." This attitude made people very uncomfortable. You make a mistake, others call you out, and you still complain that they've harmed you?
How should I put it? Perhaps they wanted to project an image of being a victim, but it didn't quite land.
The next day, Robin Li held a conference call regarding the China Central Television report. During this meeting, Robin Li made a statement that was highly controversial at the time. Providing advertiser qualifications is not a requirement of Chinese law. Search engines should perhaps not be held responsible for the authenticity of online information. This statement completely absolved them of responsibility, essentially saying, "I'm just a technical service provider. I shouldn't have to vet these ads. If there are fake ads, that's a regulatory failure, right? If there are Putian hospitals, why aren't those hospitals being managed?" This attempt to completely erase all potential future problems and wash their hands of everything was truly terrible. Because in a typical PR crisis, you usually need to go a bit overboard. For example, if you've made what people perceive as a 60% mistake, when it might actually be 40 or 50%, you need to apologize for an 80% or even 100% mistake. I'm sorry, then people will feel you're sincere. But in this case, people felt you made a 60% mistake and you only admitted to 10%, saying, "You've misunderstood me. It's not that serious, right?" What followed was a barrage of media exposure.
It also didn't achieve a perfect outcome. I believe that in the history of public relations, there are certainly successful cases of turning a bad situation around completely, but at least this particular incident was not successful.
A Baidu agent manager once said that it's true you don't just pay to get ahead. If you don't pay, they might even block you sometimes. For instance, if certain companies eventually upset Baidu, you might find that your links become unsearchable.
This is what he just said, something we haven't done before and will absolutely never do in the future.
The night Baidu issued its apology, Nasdaq opened, and Baidu's market value plummeted by 25%. A quarter of its market cap just vanished. This was truly a major crisis. Of course, one can't say their PR was necessarily bad, but Baidu did quickly make many adjustments afterward. On the 1st of December 2009, after considerable preparation, Baidu officially launched the Fengchao system, which means Phoenix Nest. It introduced the concept of a quality score. Robin Li had previously discussed 3 laws, one of which was the confidence law. Essentially, if you pay, you'll rank higher. But this factor has now become more comprehensive, somewhat like Google, as we discussed, which introduced a quality dimension. This quality isn't just website quality, it also includes ad quality. It also evaluates the effectiveness of your clicks, whether your entire ad contains a lot of false information, or if it considers more factors. You need to increase the weight of these aspects, which essentially means improving user experience rather than just a money game. This counts as an improvement in user experience. We can imagine a vertical axis. According to Robin Li's early idea, the left side of this axis represents users, and the right side represents business. Previously, this axis was bent all the way to the right. For business, I can do anything. Now it's like it's been bent back a bit towards the user's perspective.
The wording was also quite solemn.
But this shift, of course, couldn't go all the way to the extreme. If it did, they wouldn't make any money, and that's not sustainable either. So they only shifted it a little. But what did this slight shift signify? There was a crucial sentence in that Xinhua news agency report at the time, and it's still relevant today. It came from the renowned internet analyst Hong Bo, also known as Teacher Kaiso. Teacher Kaiso stated that Baidu's current adjustments are merely superficial. As long as paid search ranking remains Baidu's core business model, it will never escape endless scrutiny and negative exposure. The root of the problem lies in the logic of paid search ranking itself. If you want to maximize profits, you'll inevitably prioritize ads from highly lucrative industries, and these industries inherently tend to contain more questionable content.
This statement doesn't just apply to Baidu, right? You could apply it to many other entities with media attributes, and people would certainly agree.
For Baidu, 2009 was certainly a year of treading carefully. Public pressure, media scrutiny as a major corporation, these were all challenges Baidu encountered that year. Another event occurred that year, which we briefly touched upon in the last episode, the departure of early product leaders like Jun Yu and Bian Jiang. You can imagine, referring back to our vertical axis metaphor, there was a team dynamic at play. On the user side, the product team was pulling on that rope trying to shift it. Now, it's as if I've let go of the rope, I've resigned. The rope just snaps. And this axis, it might not even be a conscious decision, but naturally the people below will slowly start to bend it back towards the commercial side. This is a very common issue within large organizations.
It's not that the subsequent teams didn't care about these issues, but their voice and influence might have become relatively smaller.
The product team's influence became even smaller. It's like, at the time, media reports suggested that the operations team, led by COO Shen Haoyu, was more supportive of commercialization. So, after these product people left, their voice became stronger and the balance was broken. This was the first, you could say, a disaster for the company. The second disaster, which we briefly mentioned last time, was Google's withdrawal. If Google had stayed, Baidu wouldn't have continued to make mistakes down this path.
It's the same thing we talked about last time.
Next, we're going to talk about Google's withdrawal, which wasn't a sudden event but rather had a historical progression. First, in April 2006, Google.cn went online, already complying with Chinese regulatory policies, as the CN domain meant it was essentially a website hosted in China. Initially, they were very diligent, meaning they conducted censorship according to whatever policies and regulations the country provided. At the same time, products like Google Input Method, Google Maps, and Google Answers, all benchmarked against Baidu's offerings, were also being launched. Older netizens from back then might remember that Google Input Method was quite popular for a while. People also liked Google Maps. Its satellite maps were developed quite early and were very popular at the time. Overall, the effect was quite good, but as we mentioned last time, it was essentially a follower in China. In terms of localized user experience, it still lagged behind Baidu and didn't quite catch up.
Similar to the development of many multinational corporations we've discussed in China, after all, their decision-making chains are long.
Within Google, discussions about whether to comply with Chinese regulatory policies had always existed. It wasn't a sudden decision that everyone made to comply, it was an ongoing debate throughout the process. Sergey Brin, one of the co-founders, firmly believed they absolutely could not compromise. The then CEO, Eric Schmidt, still felt it was better to consider things from a business perspective. By 2009, China's internet regulation began to strengthen, especially concerning the crackdown on vulgar online content. We'll likely refer to this year many times when discussing various timelines later. At that time, many parents started reporting Google web pages that were truly unbearable, with yellow and nude photos easily searchable. People's Daily and other media outlets were leading the criticism and putting pressure on Google. On the 12th of January 2010, Google's chief legal officer published a blog post that began to circulate widely at the time. The article was titled "A New Approach to China," indicating Google's decision to hold a final negotiation with the Chinese government in the coming weeks. This was regarding the possibility of operating an unfiltered search engine within the legal framework, and it frankly stated that the negotiation outcome might not be ideal, and they might very well withdraw from China. This was a preemptive warning. Furthermore, the blog post also mentioned a hacker attack incident. The implication was that they were attacked, specifically by Chinese hackers, and this decision was made out of self-protection. This issue was highly controversial, and opinions varied. I saw different media reports, all quite distinct, and it's possible they were rather subjective views. At the time, a representative from the Cyberspace Administration of the State Council Information Office believed that Google's actions constituted a breach of the written commitments it made when entering the Chinese market. You made a commitment then, and now you're reneging, stopping the filtering of search services, and even using hacker attacks as an excuse. This is completely wrong. It's politicizing a commercial issue. At the time, they expressed dissatisfaction and indignation over Google's unreasonable accusations and actions. If Google could continue to abide by Chinese laws, just like Baidu, we would still welcome Google to operate and develop in China. After that statement was released, a war of words began between the two sides, followed by negotiations, which were then announced to have broken down. Google then lifted all censorship related to Google.cn, and simultaneously, Google's websites became inaccessible in China. To be frank, although we don't like so-called force, it's not as if they were forcibly driven out. Because many foreign companies operate in China, and essentially every country has its own regulations. Google, with its high pursuit of freedom, had different values and made a different choice, so it withdrew. At that time, for Chinese internet companies and netizens, this was a monumental, earth-shattering event. Back then, you'd say the most important internet company globally was Google, and the most important Chinese internet company was Baidu. One major ecosystem was gone, and Baidu quickly became the unshakable number one. As we said last time, was Google's exit from China good for Baidu? On the surface, yes, but it was truly a colossal disaster. It was terrible. In the internet sector, this is widely recognized as Baidu's biggest crisis. As mentioned last time, once you start making money effortlessly, your company's fighting spirit is completely gone. This isn't about Robin Lee's individual fighting spirit, it's about the entire team, the entire company. Everyone thought, since we can print money like this now, why should I still strive so hard?
Most people generally share this understanding. We often say that once you've made easy money, it's very challenging to go back to making hard money. Once you've made quick money, it's difficult to switch to making slow money. These things truly test one's resolve and are very hard to do. Exactly.
This isn't just my opinion, it was a relatively widespread consensus among the media at the time. Let me put on a hypothetical, for example, quoting what I found in financial media. The following passage states that after losing Google, this heavyweight competitor, Baidu seemed to lose its drive for innovation and progress. In those comfortable days, Baidu's sales department began to gain the upper hand. Business started to dominate search, and technology products became mere tools serving commercial interests. This is quite direct. Product and technology were indeed very important back then, but later, sales became even more crucial. There's a very clear indicator who was Baidu's second-in-command before. It was Xu Yong, one of the early co-founders we mentioned. He left in 2004 before the IPO in Shanghai to pursue investments and wasn't involved in the subsequent business. Starting from 2005, Baidu's second-in-command. Second only to one person. Above 10,000 people, He Longxiang. Didn't we discuss him last time? Yes, we did. Since 2014, the company's iron army of sales was entirely built by He Longxiang, and in the long run, Baidu's business became increasingly centered around him. Of course, we're not saying Mr. Xiang isn't capable. He's also remarkable and highly respected for his significant contributions in sales. However, there still needed to be a balance. Can you imagine the problems that arise from a sales-centric company culture? This laid the groundwork for many subsequent issues. It wasn't until Qi Lu joined Baidu in 2017, more than a decade later, that there was truly a second-in-command who cared about product and technology. But that's a story for later. In any ecosystem, having no competitors is never a good thing. In 2009, Google China withdrew, and Junyu left Baidu. These two events happening simultaneously marked a significant turning point. Speaking of Google's exit from China, we must also mention one more thing. It left behind many entrepreneurs and talented individuals. Google China was truly a prestigious Whampoa military academy. Wang Huainan, Google Asia's chief marketing officer, had a background at McKinsey and P&G. He later became a director at Yahoo and also worked on e-commerce websites. At the time, Yahoo and Sina jointly created Yipai.com, which some of you might remember. He was Yipai.com's CEO. After joining Google China, he was instrumental in localizing the Google brand name. However, he left early and later founded Babytree, which was quite a popular product back then. Guo Xuji, Google China's chief strategy officer, founded Light in the Box in 2008, which later listed on the NYSE, becoming China's first cross-border e-commerce stock. Lin Bin, vice president of Google China's Engineering Institute, is a co-founder of Xiaomi, one of its 7 co-founders. Hong Feng, a senior product manager at Google China, is also one of Xiaomi's co-founders, one of those 7. He was responsible for Google Input Method and Google Video. Later, you could say his team was behind MIUI. When I graduated, I even had the privilege of being interviewed by him and chatting with him. I think Hong Feng is also a very impressive product manager. Wang Jing, vice president of Google China's Engineering Institute, joined Baidu in 2010 as vice president of technology, leading the autonomous driving division. Wang Xiaofeng, head of Google China's East China advertising channels, became the co-founder and CEO of Mobike. The general manager of Google Shanghai R&D, Qi Xiaohu, was RedNote CTO, and he also left later. When Google China was first established in 2006, there was an engineer involved in developing the advertising system named Huang Zheng. He later left Google China to start a gaming company, and in 2015 he founded Pinduoduo. Another colleague of Huang Zheng, who also joined in 2006, worked on Google Maps and Google search ads. After leaving, he founded Umeng. When Umeng was acquired by Alibaba, he joined Alibaba, responsible for Taobao's mobile strategy, and became Taobao's president in 2019. His name is Fan Jiang. So, Fan Jiang and Huang Zheng have been direct competitors in recent years, but back then they were colleagues sharing an office. It's quite a poignant reflection on the internet world. Kai-Fu Lee himself founded Innovation Works in 2009, incubating star projects like Snappia, Umeng, and Zhihu. He's considered a pioneering leader in China's venture capital scene. We briefly touched upon these when we discussed Google before, but it's worth elaborating. That was truly a golden era of the internet, a passionate time when talent was everywhere. Nowadays, if talented people are out of work, they can't shine. There's one more person we should specifically mention. He wasn't from Google China, but came back from Google US. His name is Xidong Ye. Dongye, who worked on the social product Google Plus back then, returned to China to found Geek Park, which then incubated Xiaoyuzhou. We should also mention Mr. Hua. Getting back to it, how immediate and striking were the effects of Google's withdrawal from China? Baidu's revenue in the fourth quarter of 2010 saw a year-on-year increase you wouldn't believe, 94%. Net profit surged by 137% year-on-year, more than doubling.
Indeed, without competition, things were completely different.
By the second year, March 2011, public confidence in Baidu had soared to an extreme level. Its market value climbed to $46 billion, surpassing the then-dominant Tencent. This was the first time Baidu truly established itself in the BAT triumvirate, taking the top spot. Back then among BAT, Baidu was considered the coolest. Tencent and Alibaba were sidelined. From 2010 to 2011, Baidu was at its peak. How exaggerated was it? At the end of 2010, Robin Li proposed a 4-0-fold growth target for the next 10 years. This already sounded incredibly ambitious. A year later, it had grown 3-0-fold, meaning the target could be achieved 8 years ahead of schedule. In 2011 alone, Baidu's employee count doubled. Before 2011, Baidu had 5,000 employees. After 2011, it grew to over 10,000.
The speed of development was evident in the people.
Behind this, of course, a portion of its advertising revenue also benefited from favorable timing, location, and human factors. What exactly happened around 2011? In the Thousand Group War, Baidu was like the advertiser, the one selling water, making the most money, just like Nvidia's making the most money now with the AI boom. Alibaba's Double 11 also started gaining traction in those years. So, for Baidu, which was a key online channel for Chinese internet users at the time, it was a must-invest platform. Everyone wanted to invest, and as a result, prices soared, and advertising fees kept rising. Baidu was at its most profitable. It seemed like Baidu was doing very comfortably and steadily in 2011, but by 2012 it started to get a little restless because, amidst the calm, an opposing force began to emerge. And it wasn't the first time this force appeared. It was an old acquaintance named Hong Yizhou. We've mentioned before that Hong Yizhou had a skirmish with Baidu through Yahoo China back then, but it didn't amount to much. This time, he was challenging Baidu again, leading to the famous 3B War, which was as renowned as the 3Q War. 360, anyway, had fought wars with everyone. We'll touch upon this when we talk about CEO Hong Yizhou, just weaving in some small details from previous series. Back then, he was known as the red-clad god of war, General Zhou. On the 16th of August 2012, Qihoo's 360 search began quiet testing of its own search engine. On August 20, Comprehensive Search officially launched with the slogan, "Search it." At the same time, 360 Safe homepage, you can think of it as their How 123, which was quite famous back then, changed its default search from Baidu directly to Comprehensive Search. 360 also changed the news search behind the search bar from Baidu to Comprehensive Search. Even the 360 browser's toolbar was adjusted to feature their own Comprehensive Search. On the 22nd of August 2012, the Q&A feature within Comprehensive Search was also changed from Baidu Knows to Qihoo Q&A. Why did they call it Comprehensive Search? To be honest, it was a bit rogue. It sounds like 360 made its own search engine, but it didn't. In essence, it did an integration. It integrated various sources. I'll just take your results and put them in my presentation.
It's similar to how 360 Nano AI search operates in the current AI war, right?
This was actually to circumvent the risk of intellectual property theft. But honestly, it wasn't entirely avoidable. It was more like they were being rogue, integrating these things, taking other people's result pages, and directly putting them on their own platform to use as their own product. In the end, the traffic was yours. You had no technology, you just relied purely on business integration to make this happen. So the controversy at the time was huge, and it wasn't just search. On 29 augustus 2012, all of 360's products were completely de-Baidufied. News search was changed to comprehensive news, web search. The comprehensive search mentioned earlier was changed. Weibo search was changed to Sina Weibo, video search to 360 video, MP3 search to Sugu MP3, image search to Geek Images. This Geek isn't the one we know today. It was a very famous national search engine called Geek Search back then, an early product. Map search was changed to Google Maps, Q&A to Qihoo Q&A, shopping search to Taobao. So at that time, everything was de-Baidufied. This was a very famous blitzkrieg. 360, leveraging its absolute control over the browser client, completed an unprecedented universe shift in just over 10 days. Of course, some listeners might ask, didn't 360 users still have to use Baidu? Or rather, did these 360 users stop using Baidu? The 360 browser back then was a formidable presence. Its market share made it the second largest browser in China. The largest wasn't even domestic, it was Windows built-in IE. If you didn't install any browser, you'd use IE. But if you wanted something more convenient and a domestic browser, you'd install 360. 360 browsers' monthly active users in 2012 were 300 million. This instantly wiped out a lot of market share.
I remember it vividly. In the years following that one, many of my computer science classmates didn't use 360, but I had actually gotten used to it and used it for a long time, you know?
According to monitoring by third-party data company Hitwise, as of the 26th of August 2012, just 10 days after 360 Search launched, its market share reached 10% of the search engine market. Baidu's market share, meanwhile, plummeted from a high of 80% to less than 60%. In just 10 days, such a massive user migration had never occurred in the history of the Chinese internet. Baidu's internal team was in a complete panic, realizing, wow, we have such low user stickiness, they just migrated away at your command in less than 10 days. The report went all the way to the top. 6 months later, 360 Search's market share had reached 15%. This entire 3B war, with its offense and defense, was also particularly interesting and characteristic of the internet domain. Let's briefly mention it again. Around 9 p.m. on August 28, Baidu engineers began implementing a technical countermeasure. They identified the source of requests. Since you're scraping my web pages, scraping my data, I'll check if you're from 360 and prevent you from scraping. If a user from 360 clicked on a search result, you're not scraping mine. Let me give an example. Many people searched Baidu because Baidu had Baidu Tieba, Baidu Knows, and Baidu Baike with a lot of information. If 360 directly displayed these pages in its search results, and you clicked to open them, that would be a normal user experience. But Baidu did something. When you tried to open any of Baidu's affiliated websites from 360, it wouldn't directly open the page. Instead, it would force a redirect to Baidu's homepage, making you search again. It was such a simple operation. I'll annoy you. As long as you search for my stuff through 360, I won't let you open it directly. I'll make you search again. I'll forcibly degrade the user experience for 360 search users. For Baidu, this was reasonable. They also added a wall. If you use Baidu search, you could search directly and your results would open directly. What's this similar to? It's actually a bit like what we see in browsers today. For various products, not just Baidu, you have to click to download the app to see the rest of the full text, right? It's a common practice now. They don't allow forced redirects anymore, but the annoying reminders are always there, constantly. What did 360 do then? If you're going to be rogue, don't blame me for being rogue too. Within hours of Baidu putting up its redirect wall, 360 had already deployed its countermeasure. It no longer allowed user clicks to directly access Baidu's servers. I've already copied and pasted all your web pages. This really touched upon, how should I say, the level of rogue behavior had exceeded everyone's imagination. They directly pasted Baidu's website.
It's a bit like Baidu Snapshot or Web Snapshots.
This was like a form of plagiarism we hadn't really seen before. Nowadays, no platform or app would dare to directly copy and use someone else's content, right? It was a complete copy. So at that time, they were really fighting tooth and nail. Another point was that they had a very fierce debate over a protocol called robots, TXT, also known as the crawler protocol or robot protocol. This is considered a gentleman's agreement between websites and search engine crawlers. What does that mean? It means my website has a robots protocol. When you crawl, you check this protocol. It clearly states what content can be crawled and what cannot. It's like, you come to my house, I open the door, but I'll tell you, these rooms are off limits, don't go in there. Before this, search engine crawlers always respected this gentleman's agreement. But when 360 crawled, they didn't care about any of that. They ignored all of Baidu's various product protocols and pulled all the content, whether it was snapshots or whatever, directly onto their servers using various methods. At that time, Baidu engineer Zhao Minghua publicly accused 360 on Weibo of illegally prying into user privacy, hijacking users, and being a thief and robber who didn't respect basic internet protocols. So, what did Hong Yizhou and 360 say? They had their own argument. They said, "You're the ones abusing the robots protocol. This protocol is a technical means to protect website privacy and security. You're now using it as a commercial weapon for business competition to suppress rivals and maintain your monopolistic position. Asterisk. That's times abuse. We are enforcing justice on behalf of heaven, robbing the rich and giving to the poor. We're doing this for the user's benefit. Furthermore, if you claim this is for user privacy, then why did you modify the robots protocol to add many clauses specifically targeting 360? If you're protecting user privacy, then when other crawlers come, you should say that everyone can't enter these rooms, not just that 360 can't enter while others can, right? You have no justification." Anyway, a long-term war of words ensued, and both sides quickly ended up in court. Baidu sued 360 for unfair competition, and 360 countersued Baidu for abusing its dominant market position. This is a common tactic. Latecomers always accuse the incumbent of monopoly. In April 2013, the Beijing No. 1 Intermediate People's Court issued a first-instance judgment in one of the unfair competition cases, ruling that 360 constituted unfair competition and ordering it to pay Baidu 450,000 RMB in economic damages and issue an apology. This amount wasn't very large for such a case. This was a major blow to 360. In August, another ruling declared that 360's forced crawling of Baidu's content violated the robots protocol and constituted unfair competition, ordering it to pay 700,000 RMB. This was a second major blow. At the same time, 360 also won its countersuit against Baidu. Baidu's discriminatory treatment of 360 using the robots protocol was also deemed unfair competition. Just because they were wrong didn't mean Baidu was right. Both sides had their arguments, and in the end, Baidu also received a blow. So both sides were punished, each having their own rogue aspects and their own points to publicize. The robots protocol, of course, is just a small, tiny facet of internet products. But in reality, the 2013 incident, even though we didn't experience it directly, still had a huge impact on the landscape of the Chinese internet today, and even the global internet. We can all deeply feel its result, the beginning of the blocking wars on the Chinese internet. They started blocking each other, and ordinary users were the ones who suffered. Today, we can't use Taobao within WeChat, and we can't search for official accounts on Baidu. All of this started around 2013. It's called the internet.
It's no longer just the internet. And for several years now, people have been talking about breaking down these barriers, fighting for years, taking small steps forward, gradually moving along.
Who knows where it went? It's also inevitable. Everyone has commercial pursuits and commercial competition. During the 3B war, while both sides were clashing, on the 3rd of September 2012, Charles Zhang, CEO of Sugu, grandly announced that its search business, Sugu, officially joined the battle. 3B became 3SB. 3B became 3SB. At the time, the media had this saying, 3SB, which carried a bit of mockery. This was the 3SB war. For Sugu at the time, there was indeed an opportunity to capitalize. If Baidu was under attack, Sugu could also gain an advantage. Also, 360 lacked some services like MP3 search, which Sugu had. This allowed Sugu to attract more traffic. Coupled with Sugu's 3-stage rocket strategy later on, which was quite successful. As we discussed before, after the three-way battle in search engines, a result emerged, which we talked about in our episode on Sugo. In September 2013, Tencent also entered the game. It made a strategic investment in Sugu, and its Sugu search business merged into Sugu, forming a long-term tripartite standoff in the 3SB war. Of course, Baidu was still the undisputed number one, but in that era, people probably used a slightly wider variety of search engines. This wasn't a long-term threat to Baidu. On one hand, 360 and Sugu's technical and user experience development honestly wasn't as robust as Baidu's foundation. On the other hand, Baidu's family bucket of products was too rich. Baidu Tieba, Baidu Baike, Baidu Knows. These had long-term accumulation after all because it was a UGC platform.
I'm on a website, and this particular content might not be able to be pulled over.
But if you take 2 steps, it'll eventually catch up to you. If you only talk about the value of a search engine, it's clearly much smaller in comparison. Also, user habits have been formed. This has been mentioned several times before, I believe. Recently, in the Baidu Tieba Weekly, Xiaolei also mentioned Junyu's experience formula. When people are used to one search engine to make them switch to another, the experience difference needs to be significant. Otherwise, why would I switch? This is very difficult to achieve. Subsequently, after the entire search engine market shifted to mobile, 360 search's market recognition became even lower. Why? Because 360 still relied on its own browser. On mobile, 360 itself didn't have a particularly strong presence. So, in the long run, Baidu also dominated on mobile. And then, the biggest problem later on was that people no longer needed search. This wasn't because search was bad, or Baidu was bad, it was not due to the fault in the battle. One reason is the way content is acquired on the mobile internet, which we all experience today. It's through apps, not search engines. Apps are closed ecosystems, and this is a major reason for what we call the product walls of the Chinese internet today. RedNote, Taobao, Bilibili, Douyin, and other content platforms all have their own internal search functions. Also, the way content is created is no longer PGC websites. It has actually become UGC-driven social media. Baidu simply can't get a foothold in these platforms where most content is consumed. You can probably still find some RedNote content on Baidu, I remember being able to, but most content is simply not searchable. The problems Baidu can solve today are becoming fewer and fewer. This is a bit different from Google, because people often say, isn't Google better? If you look at Google's overall business volume now, it's much better than Baidu's. This is partly because Google is good, but also because overseas users have different usage habits. Many people overseas still use search engines. Most Chinese people's first internet device wasn't a computer. In the early days of the Chinese internet, those netizens were still a minority. Perhaps a small group of people, like us who are a bit older but not too old, or even older people who never touched the internet. We, this small group in the middle, happened to catch that era where our first internet device was a computer. But for most people, whether older or younger, everyone uses mobile phones. Many haven't developed the habit of regularly using search engines, or they don't really care about them. I really hadn't thought about this perspective before. It's related to their native habits and the lack of a habit of using websites. This is very important. For example, when a new AI product becomes popular, friends around me automatically ask, which app is this? What's its name so I can download it? But it's different overseas. Overseas, people directly search for things. For example, why are many overseas products now just shells, JPG shells, or AI-generated image, video shells, so popular and profitable abroad? It's because many people still directly search for functions on Google and use them on web pages. This habit difference is huge. This habit leads to very different market environments for Google and Baidu. Current search engines are only used to solve some trivial problems, like should I add sugar to scrambled eggs with tomatoes? But you'll find that in recent years, this kind of question is also being solved by RedNote or AI. You can just search for a video. So for Baidu, at this historical turning point, you can only transform. You can't rely on search engines forever. So we come to the second part, missed a great opportunity and wasted time on pointless pursuits. What was Baidu thinking at the time? Honestly, in 2009, even though Google was about to exit China and Baidu had already secured the top spot, it still had some awareness of optimization. Robin Li then proposed a new concept called box computing. What does that mean? It means the search box, this box, shouldn't just search for information. In the future, it should be upgraded to a universal entry point. I can also directly provide you with services. For example, you can search for videos, and in the future, you can search for movies and TV series, and even buy tickets directly. Baidu could also identify these services and match them with higher quality service providers for response and processing. Could Baidu truly become an infrastructure? This concept was quite advanced, to be honest. The general idea was that Baidu should become an operating system. To give another example, WeChat was just a communication tool in its early days. Later, it had official accounts. Then it opened up more functions. Now it has mini programs, mini games, and various ecosystems. It's more like an operating system. Baidu wanted to do this in 2009. This line of thinking was very reasonable. You can hear this in what I'm saying. I see. At that time, the idea was not just to connect with websites, but also with a large number of service providers, truly aiming to meet everyone's daily needs in the future. This judgment was very accurate. In 2010, Baidu launched its application open platform and the Aladdin box computing platform. Speaking of Aladdin, some friends might remember that in 2010, if you search for simple information or questions, like a math problem, a celebrity's birthday, or common knowledge like how far are we from the moon, there was a box that directly provided answers. This box indeed offered many intelligent answers very similar to what AI provides today, though it was probably rule-based. I remember that experience. It was quite novel and good. It was great. Even when you did calculations, it would put the calculator service right at the top and you could continue using it directly. It's still like that now. In fact, even today, besides my phone, I still use Baidu for calculations. That's Aladdin. In 2011, Baidu launched a brand new homepage. Under the traditional search box, it added 4 major modules: navigation notifications, real-time hot topics, and new applications. The new homepage opened up interfaces to webmasters and developers. It was no longer just a search page. It could provide other services. It wasn't just displaying a link and a description. There could be many functions on it. Baidu also had a more practical strategy, an extension of box computing called middle page. What does middle page mean? It means encompassing these scenarios by investing in acquisitions, collaborating with middle page websites, or building its own middle pages. Box computing was like my infrastructure. I had the interface to connect. Additionally, I required these connected service providers to also be integrated into my ecosystem. For example, investing in Qunar.com was a strategy under the middle page initiative at the time because travel is a service people clearly search for frequently. After searching, I might buy tickets or other travel experience services. Once I've got the website sorted, won't Baidu be able to solve everything in the future?
It sounds like an internet-based Mi Home ecosystem.
Yes, this is an ecosystem of an ecological chain. By investing, I'll enhance control over the ecosystem. This includes e-commerce, home services, lifestyle services, recruitment, and so on. For example, Qunar.com was an investment, and there's incubation. IQIYI is an example of incubation. By building up these vertical information websites, Baidu would have its own more complete ecosystem. No one else could even get close. Purely from a logical perspective, that was a very reasonable logic back then. A giant needs to consolidate its position. Just providing pure information versus being able to offer a variety of services in the future, clearly, the latter has higher barriers or moats. But plans can't keep up with changes. The plan was right, but one thing went wrong. What went wrong? We'll know if we look at the timeline. The platform was wrong. On the 28th of April 2011, the iPhone 4 was released, and on October 14, the iPhone 4S was released. I believe many netizens who lived through that era can relate. A large number of Chinese users started using iPhones that year. The true Chinese mobile internet began in those years. In March 2011, Baidu's market value soared to $46 billion US. As we just mentioned, it surpassed the then booming Tencent. Among BAT, it became the most dominant. This was a historic moment. The gears of fate turned very subtly. In March 2011, Baidu surpassed Tencent to become number 1. Just 2 months prior, an inconspicuous product launched in Guangzhou, WeChat. The gears of history turned so subtly. These 2 events happened within just 2 months. They just connected. Just as Baidu was at its peak, Tencent had already laid the groundwork. Although Baidu's overall strategic direction with box computing and middleware was correct, there was indeed a misjudgment regarding the platform, a very clear misjudgment. At the 2012 Baidu World Conference, Robin Li said, "Mobile internet is currently the best, moving too fast, the path isn't clear. Everyone is stumbling forward." He believed that mobile applications were for fragmented time. Let's go back to 2012 and imagine why such words were spoken. It's all fragmented time. When I'm on the toilet, I just take it out for a quick look, just a few minutes. You can't do anything substantial. Things like advertising, gaming, and e-commerce. China's 3 mature internet businesses could never be established on mobile internet.
It might have a lot to do with personal experience. He might not realize it himself.
The entire industry thought this way back then. We'll touch on that a bit later, but let's stick to this for now.
I've mentioned before, in a very early series, I believe it was in the main feature, that around 2009, I saw reports. There were clear predictions then that within 5 years, most internet activities would be on mobile devices. At that time, I couldn't imagine it at all, but there were already clear reports and predictions like that.
So, regarding this conclusion, people's view of mobile internet was positive. However, concerning some specific businesses, since you brought it up, I'll mention something briefly. For example, I used to work at Alibaba. When I talked to some veteran Taobao employees, Taobao actually conducted a lot of market research when mobile internet first emerged. They asked all sorts of users and consumers, including their own experiences. They considered shopping on mobile phones a pseudo-demand because phone screens back then were even smaller. You couldn't clearly see product details, and with such tiny text, trying to examine product parameters, people would find it very uncomfortable.
The overall layout wasn't well done either.
There were many objective limitations at the time. For example, as you mentioned, layout issues, display problems on mobile phones, and payment issues. Back then, payments weren't as convenient as they are now. People hadn't linked credit cards or similar. So payment was also a very difficult thing. Therefore, with these limitations, reaching this conclusion back then, including users and consumers themselves having this conclusion, was a very common phenomenon. Robin Li's judgment at the time was also based on the data and information available at that moment. Looking back, this judgment was definitely wrong, but it can only be said that it was a relatively reasonable judgment at the time.
To be frank, for Baidu, whether that judgment was right or wrong didn't have that big of an impact.
Execution would later become an issue. Of course, we're looking back at this now, and we'll discuss these things again later, but let's go back to 2012. What kind of year was 2012? When we talked about Weibo before, we mentioned that Weibo considered itself the first mobile super app. By 2012, 72% of Weibo users were accessing it via mobile. So, some phenomena were indeed emerging. Robin Li wasn't saying people shouldn't use mobile internet. Rather, he believed the business model wasn't viable, that mobile internet was just charity. He thought, Weibo, in the future, if you can't make money, what will you do? But he held this judgment, including aggressive computing strategies and many intermediary page tactics and many subsequent actions, which significantly slowed down their mobile transition. From this perspective, including Alibaba's judgment at the time, as we just discussed, we can sense that it's truly difficult for big companies to continue monopolizing in a new era. The BAT companies stumbled quite a bit trying to find their ticket to the mobile internet era. Tencent was lucky to have WeChat in addition to QQ. If they had still relied on QQ to make a mobile QQ, they might have approached it with a PC product mindset, and the likelihood of getting that ticket would have decreased. They might not have missed it entirely, but Baidu and Alibaba had a much harder time getting that ticket, giving up a large chunk of the market. For example, what Toutiao did should have been Baidu's forte, and what Pinduoduo did was Alibaba's specialty. As we just said, Baidu had some misjudgments in certain areas, but by the end of 2012, Baidu also started to get nervous. On one hand, many companies' mobile transitions were gaining traction, and on the other hand, they were facing competition from San Liuling. It was in this year that Robin Li wrote an all-staff letter encouraging everyone to embrace wolf nature. This was widely discussed back then. The emergence of wolf nature, if you think about it, was over a decade ago. What should be done based on wolf nature? Next came Baidu's mobile transformation. In July 2013, there was big news. Baidu spent $1.9 billion to acquire the well-known mobile app distribution platform, 91Zhushou. This was, at the time, the largest merger and acquisition in China's internet history by monetary value.
It had a huge impact. What did we talk about in previous episodes? Oh, in the episode about Sohu, we briefly mentioned this.
Speaking of 91Zhushou, it's a memory for a generation of internet users. Its parent company is NetDragon, which we've discussed before, a remarkable company from Fuzhou. They bought the gaming portal 17173, which Sohu later acquired for over $20 million. 91Zhushou was also their acquisition. 91Zhushou first appeared in 2007, made for long-term iPhone users in China. It was a software installed on computers to manage information and data on iPhones. Back then, it was called iPhone PC Suite. Its founder, Xiang Jun, sold it to NetDragon for only 100,000 RMB. So, 91Zhushou was bought for 100,000 RMB and sold for $1.9 billion. Just think, NetDragon is truly a magical company. It was incredibly valuable. What were the earliest functions of that PC suite? jailbreaking and installing apps.
That would be a huge demand.
For iPhone users who lived through that era, there was of course the issue of piracy and also localization problems. Many apps in the official store were difficult to manage, so everyone preferred jailbroken devices.
And many simple features that Chinese people really needed.
Things like flashlights were consistently missing. Features like changing themes, backing up data, and so on. People didn't like using official tools for these, so they all used 91zhushou. Around 2011, 91zhushou successfully transformed because official restrictions started to increase. 91zhushou became a third-party distribution platform. While it couldn't distribute apps for iOS stores later on, it could for the Android market. So, 91zhushou successfully pivoted. Domestic mobile phones were still in their early competitive stages, so there wasn't the official App Store landscape we see today. App stores were extremely important in the early days, almost the most important application. When you got an Android phone, your first thought was, of course, to download apps. At that time, there were two giants for downloading apps, 91zhushou and Snapia, and their features were incredibly powerful. Besides being an app store that could distribute applications, they also managed contacts, SMS, backed up data, changed wallpapers, changed ringtones, and so on, all sorts of functions. Everyone would download one. This was essentially a very important component beyond the system's native functions. The vast majority of people had this need, unless you were a very tech-savvy person. By March 2012, 91zhushou's total user base exceeded 75 million, and Android Market's total user base exceeded 21 million. Android Market was another product under 91zhushou. The two major app distribution platforms had accumulated over 5 billion total downloads. By September 2012, 91zhushou had accumulated 127 million users, and Android Market had accumulated 50 million users, with downloads approaching 10 billion. It was basically the undisputed #1 distribution market in China. Additionally, that year there were other app stores like Jifeng Market and Anji Market, which I still vaguely remember. This also slightly explains that the earliest mobile assistants were actually PC-based, like 91zhushou, which only operated on PC. It wasn't until 2013 that mobile versions, including Sanluling Mobile Assistant and Tencent App Store, gradually started appearing, and everyone began competing in the mobile space.
Initially, there wasn't much demand for mobile. People were still used to PC, like the backup needs you just mentioned.
Exactly. Also because there were no conditions. Early mobile phones had terrible performance, so some features that a mobile assistant might have couldn't be implemented. That was one reason, related to performance. Around 2013, it's said that Robin Li heard Jack Ma was already in talks with 91zhushou, and he got anxious. And it wasn't just Alibaba, Hong Yizhou had also been in contact. All these competitors were reaching out to 91zhushou. It was either cooperation or acquisition. Baidu was very anxious and finally decided to enter aggressively, spending $1.9 billion. It was considered a very sincere price at the time, and it was thought to be worth it because Baidu's mobile transition, as mentioned earlier, was slow. So, the idea was to directly secure the market leader. This also aligns with a theory from an early core strategic figure at Baidu named Tang Haisong, called the Giant Mountain Theory. The general idea is that we don't participate in early competition when things are uncertain. We wait until the tree grows big, then we look at the top few players in the market and acquire them, directly cutting down the biggest one. This is like picking the fruit. That was Baidu's strategic investment approach at the time, and 91zhushou was acquired following this strategy. It did cause some controversy back then. Was 91zhushou really worth that much? $1.9 billion? Couldn't Baidu have built one themselves? What did Baidu actually do? Well, from 2013 to 2015, Baidu's overall mobile transformation seemed quite promising. There was a lot of praise for Baidu's mobile efforts because at that time, Mingyu Li, who was in charge of Baidu's mobile business group, developed apps like Mobile Baidu, Baidu Mobile Assistant, Baidu Browser, Baidu Mobile Input Method, Baidu Voice Assistant, and many others. Many of these had a huge impact, some even reaching first or second place in their categories. When Baidu Mobile Assistant was launched, it was incredibly popular. Many industry executives directly texted Mingyu Li. One executive from a competitor texted him, saying, "You guys are truly amazing, incredible. You're going to soar." Mingyu Li screenshotted the message and sent it directly to Baidu's director group. Everyone liked it, forming a unified front. Then Robin Li typed 8 characters, praise, no regrets for a passionate youth. Many people were shocked. Someone said, "I've been in this group for so many years, and this is the first time I've seen Mr. Li talk like this." He was clearly excited, feeling emotional at that moment. That year, the Baidu Mobile Assistant team was named the company's best team. Mobile Assistant, Browser, Input Method, these have had a huge impact over the years, and the user experience was indeed very good. I remember using some of those products myself back then.
In my impression, for a long time, the input method was on par with Sugu.
But this really felt like a case of bad timing. I guess no one could have predicted it back then. We have a major premise here. The landscape of domestic mobile phone brands was unclear. Starting in 2014, Huawei, Xiaomi, Oppo, and Vivo quickly became market leaders, carving up the market. The previous generation of miscellaneous brands and Huaqiangbei phones were all eliminated. After the market was divided, it was very natural. Imagine you're a phone manufacturer. One of the first things you do is make your own app store, a system-level application that can't be uninstalled and is ready to use upon boot up. This fundamentally cut off users' access to third-party stores. My store, first of all, wouldn't host third-party stores. If you tried to install one, some might not even install. Across the board, various silent installations were also prohibited. Of course, this was also good for users. Before, you might install one app and find 5 more on your desktop. A family bucket would just appear. At the same time, if you used a third-party app installer, a pop-up would appear every time warning you about security. Many users would then simply not install it. The entire market for mobile app distribution, and even mobile assistance, the market for nuances and Snap that I just mentioned, disappeared instantly. Furthermore, it wasn't just about user experience, there was also a huge commercial interest. The channel revenue share from pre-installed apps and games was a massive source of income. For the 4 major manufacturers Huawei, Oppo, and Vivo, this was extremely important. We might touch upon this again later. It wasn't until 2017 that Baidu finally completely shut down its Fuzhou R&D center. Baidu had always had a branch office in Fuzhou specifically for 911. That era ended. Many people later criticized the 911 acquisition as a major failure. On the 17th of February 2020, Baidu officially announced the discontinuation of 910. Other mobile applications, apart from Baidu's own Shoubai, also gradually declined. But honestly, this situation is like, if you did well in mobile back then, you were sweetie. If you couldn't keep up with mobile later, you became old cow, right? Let's get back to that.
We'll get back to that.
The most recent news about 911 that people might remember is probably from 2016, when Mingyuan Li was accused of having huge private financial dealings with an acquired company, specifically related to the 911 acquisition. Mingyuan Li admitted his mistake, resigned, and the crown prince's abdication occurred. That was the incident. Of course, overall, people have a somewhat negative view of him, but some also say it was a case of being targeted out of jealousy. Mobile development was doing so well back then, and the 911 acquisition was also considered a great move by Baidu at the time. But later, when mobile development was perceived to have problems, someone had to take the blame, and that's how it turned out. On the mobile front, besides the apps and mobile assistants I just mentioned, many people also set their sights on search. While PC search had just enjoyed a few years of peace, mobile search was a new battleground. Everyone saw an opportunity and an old friend reappeared. This time it wasn't Hong Yizhou, it was Jack Ma. He was back. These old rivals kept showing up one after another. In April 2014, Alibaba acquired UC and jointly launched a new mobile search engine, Shenma Search, continuing to challenge Baidu. The logic was almost identical to Hong Yizhou's. Back then, UC browser was a very important mobile browser. If you changed the default search engine to Shenma, you'd immediately gain market share. It was the exact same playbook as 360 back then. Third-party data showed that Shenma gained 20% market share overnight. It was that high, and the logic was the same. Moreover, besides regular web search, Shenma Search also offered e-commerce search, directly linking to Taobao, and app search, which then linked to app distribution. This was a fantastic story. It was like they found a differentiator, and only Alibaba could integrate with Taobao. Baidu immediately retaliated. Many users found that if they searched for Shenma on Baidu, "This website is unsafe" warning would appear next to the link. Sometimes, you couldn't even find Shenma, and UC Browser couldn't be found in 910's App Store. Across all Baidu products, UC Browser seemed to cease to exist. All entry points were cut off. This was also a form of relatively malicious competition, a short-term retaliation. Beyond short-term retaliation, Baidu also focused heavily on its own Baidu app, integrating previously accumulated content like Baidu Maps, Baidu Tieba, and Baidu Knows. So, you still need this kind of competitive relationship. What Alibaba did made Baidu focus more on making its mobile end more comprehensive and integrated. It immediately gained traction. Content that Shenma Search couldn't access honestly, for e-commerce search, searching on Taobao wasn't impossible, and its substitutability was quite strong. But for content like Baidu Knows and Baidu Baike, if you couldn't find it on Shenma Search, the information you ultimately got would be lacking. At this point, both sides started another smear campaign. Baidu brought up the robots, TXT protocol again. Anyway, this whole back and forth felt like they were using the same script as a few years ago. For many years, Shenma Search consistently held over 10% of the market share. Was it really that long? Not until now, but for many years back then. In later years, it wasn't that Shenma Search wasn't good enough, it was that mobile browsers became increasingly less important. To be honest, nowadays, when people use a browser, they don't typically use a third-party one, they use the one built into their phone. If it can handle a quick search for minor needs, that's usually enough. So the entry point for mobile internet became apps, not browsers, and UC and Shenma Search gradually declined. The Baidu app also transformed into a newsfeed product. It's no longer the search engine browser it once was, or what we now call Shoubai, or the Baidu app. It's no longer a search engine product. Now, it integrates various other content, making it more like Jinri Tutiao. Perhaps that's a good way to understand it. We'll talk about this later because I've actually never used it, even though I've been bombarded with pop-ups for it many, many times. In recent years, to be honest, another well-known competitor has emerged, Quark Browser and Quark Search. This is another trend competing with Baidu, but relatively speaking, they've differentiated themselves. They've done a lot in educational scenarios, including AI scenarios in the past 2 years. WeChat also has its own search. This goes back to what I just said. If you have your own content, a massive amount of it, WeChat search, I think, has indeed become more useful than other searches in many scenarios. It includes content from official accounts and video accounts, which is relatively in-depth. So when it comes to search and information distribution, competitors are constantly emerging. Currently, WeChat's biggest focus has shifted to AI. We won't elaborate on that. Let's move on to the third chapter, $1 billion gamble smoke clears. What we just discussed was the first major strategic direction for mobile. Next, there's another significant mobile product, a separate area beyond Mingyuan Li's purview. This core product is Baidu Maps. Baidu Maps wasn't included in the previous list of Baidu Mobile Assistant input methods or browsers. That was one department. This is another major initiative. Let's take our time. Baidu Maps, like the early T8 and MP3, was also driven by demand. At the time, over 8% of Baidu search queries were related to maps. So very early on, when Junyu was still there, Baidu launched a quick map entry point. It wasn't actually a self-developed product, it was a shell based on third-party content, meaning they collaborated with other map providers. You could directly use the information they provided to search for addresses or whatever. A single third party. In 2008, Li Yinan, then Baidu's CTO, decided to commit all Baidu's resources to maps. This was crucial for Baidu's mobile war. This was back in 2008. The resources referred to the entire product experience. But behind that, when you talk about surveying all the cities in China for maps, you can't start from scratch. So they initially partnered with Navinfo. Navinfo was a leading domestic map provider with Class A surveying and mapping qualifications. It could provide underlying map data, and Baidu would add other data on top to create a complete experience. In 2009, Baidu sold its map data, and a brand new Baidu Maps was officially launched at a world conference. Upon launch, its user base grew rapidly, quickly exceeding 10 million daily active users. At that time, it was a national essential application. AutoNavi was nowhere to be seen then. In 2013, Baidu began talks with AutoNavi for an acquisition. If Baidu had acquired AutoNavi then, the market landscape would have been completely different. But later, Alibaba swooped in and acquired AutoNavi. At the time, Baidu actually wanted to acquire Navinfo, but Tencent was Navinfo's second largest shareholder, and Tencent was also developing maps. When Baidu saw this, the situation became difficult and complicated. So, they ultimately acquired the industry's third largest player, Changdi Wanfang. We should also mention AutoNavi. AutoNavi was originally a B2B service, it wasn't a B2C product. Before acquiring the industry's third largest player, Baidu Maps was reorganized in 2012. It was no longer called the Baidu Maps department, it became the LBS business unit. They gave it a very grand name, a big title. LBS was a frequently mentioned concept back then. Location-based services, or LBS, emerged when mobile internet first took off. People realized that if everyone had a phone, they could do things based on geographical location that search engines couldn't do before. Because with a search engine on a computer, you might only see keywords. But LBS meant knowing where a person was, and I could provide information like nearby restaurants, local life services, navigation, payment merchants, and so on. So O2O services were also based on LBS. However, the concept of LBS isn't mentioned much today because by default, when we talk about going online, Baidu Maps is considered the core of LBS. From an entry point perspective, this is also reasonable because it has all sorts of markers. Whether it's a merchant, I can automatically link to group buying. For a cinema, I can buy tickets right there. Back in 2012, they believed that based on geographical location, maps were the most crucial entry point. In the future, on the map, I could integrate ride-hailing, ticket purchasing, seat reservations, short-term rentals, recruitment, dating, everything felt very logical. So, Baidu Maps, as the most critical source of traffic and the most crucial, already established application with a user base and daily active users, became the core of the LBS business. They started building all sorts of other services around it. These were the golden years of LBS. During this golden age, the Baidu LBS business unit could be said to have been star-studded. Cheng Jing, the product manager back then, later left to start his own business and founded Roborock, which is also a very well-known brand. Chen Qing, the BD for the LBS business unit at the time, later became the overall head of Yum China's delivery business. Another key figure was Lu Wenyang, who later became the CEO of Yidaishi. And of course, there's Fu Zhongwang, whom we'll discuss later. He was also a core member of the LBS business unit. By 2013, Baidu Maps users had exceeded 200 million, with a market share as high as 70%. At that time, it was unrivaled. On the afternoon of the 28th of August 2013, Baidu suddenly announced that navigation would be permanently free. In earlier years, navigation was a paid service. It was paid software.
No one really remembers that.
AutoNavi panicked at the time. They were caught off guard. They were preparing, but didn't expect Baidu to move so quickly. Back then, AutoNavi cost 50 yuan. If you wanted to use AutoNavi, they had no choice but to follow suit and announce it was free. At that time, AutoNavi had always been a follower and imitator. Although AutoNavi was very passive back then, good fortune may come from misfortune. AutoNavi later joined Alibaba and became one of Alibaba's most successful acquisitions, perhaps even the most successful. This was thanks to Yongfu Yu. Yongfu Yu cut all O2O businesses. He didn't believe in that path and took a completely different route from Baidu. Baidu believed that maps would evolve into a very comprehensive local services market in the future, but Yongfu Yu believed that AutoNavi should focus solely on navigation. So, these two paths ultimately led to different outcomes, as we've seen.
In 2013, Baidu Maps was probably at its peak. I distinctly remember being amazed at the time. When I was looking for those tiny alleys in Beijing, the kind you wouldn't normally walk into even if you were right there, it could navigate you to them. I thought, the precision of this map to reach this level is truly impressive. Back then, I wasn't even aware of a navigation app called Gaode. I had never used it.
In 2013, the same year Baidu acquired 91 Assistant, Baidu also undertook a major initiative aligned with its LBS strategy, acquiring a group buying website called nuomi.com. Many of you might still remember it, but perhaps not its origins. It wasn't created by Baidu, it was developed by renren.com. This was part of the middle-tier industry strategy we discussed earlier, which is essentially the same logic as Baidu Maps. A search engine followed by services, or Baidu Maps followed by various service providers. I provide all sorts of services. Nuomi.com's founder and CEO was Puma Shenboyang Shen, who was then the vice president of Renren Incorporated. It developed with the backing of renren.com and was founded in 2010. This year marked the beginning of the 1,000 Group Buy War. It launched just 2 weeks after Meituan, if I recall correctly, so it was a product from roughly the same period. For younger listeners, let me explain. If you went back to 2010, there were thousands, and I'm not exaggerating, thousands of group buying websites just like Meituan. Today, when we talk about group buying, many might not even know what it is. It's essentially in-store deals, like what you find on Dianping and Meituan. Buying coupons, or what we now call discount checkout, might seem a bit unfamiliar or abstract to everyone today, but back then, group buying websites were incredibly popular. If you wanted to go out, you'd search everywhere to see if a particular store had any discount coupons available and where you could buy them. There were so many. At the time, media reportedly counted over 5,000 group buying websites, many of them localized. At their peak, an average of 13 to 17 new ones would emerge every single day, over a dozen a day. I remember when we were in college, didn't a senior, a Mr. Jing, even start a group buying website? Yes, he did it during his undergraduate years, a local one. Meituan was the one that ultimately fought its way out of that sea of blood, unifying the market from thousands of websites. Thinking about it, that's an incredibly daunting achievement. It was truly difficult. Back to nuomi.com, on its launch day, in partnership with a Beijing cinema, it launched a super value movie ticket package. Advertised on renren.com, it quickly sold 150,000 packages in a single day, becoming an instant hit. Nuomi.com endured many ups and downs, many seasons, like a phoenix through snow and moon, how much sorrow. I can't remember the exact phrase. Many group buying websites had pretty much died out. Data showed that in 2012, Nuomi.com held a 5% market share among independent group buying websites, already placing it in the top 5. By then, the war was largely over. The top 5 group buying websites in 2013 achieved a transaction volume of 33.8 billion, accounting for 95.7% of the total. Meituan and Dianping had monthly transaction volumes exceeding 1 billion yuan. These two were the first tier. The second tier, including Nuomi, Wawo, and Lashu, all very well-known group buying websites back then, had monthly transaction volumes of 300 to 400 million yuan. That's when Baidu began its research, applying the giant mountain theory. So which one should I acquire? I need to have one, right? It originally negotiated with Dianping, but Robin Li hesitated for a long time, and then Tencent swooped in and acquired it. Tencent ended up with a 20% stake and integrated it with QQ and WeChat. In August 2013, Baidu finally announced a strategic investment of $160 million in nuomi.com, acquiring a 59% stake. 6 months later, in January 2014, Baidu announced the acquisition of all remaining shares of nuomi.com, making it a wholly owned subsidiary under Baidu, renamed Baidu Nuomi. Puma Shenboyang Shen took charge. This essentially meant Baidu was managing it directly. The strategic direction at the time, as mentioned, was to make it the core business of the LBS division. However, there was still a problem. It sounded good conceptually, but people's primary use for maps, or at least their mindset back then, was navigation. Imagine, even today, when you open a map app, of course, Gaode and Baidu spent a long time adjusting to this. People now have some inclination to look for discounts, other information, or ride-hailing. But back then, absolutely. When people opened a map, they wanted navigation. If you pushed other information, their interest wasn't that high. It's very difficult to make users switch contexts. For example, if you open Douyin now, are you going to watch 2 hours of Caffè Breve videos? That's too difficult. It's not that the platform can't do it, but users can't switch contexts. When they open it, they want navigation. You couldn't quickly build up the group buying business within Baidu Maps because user habits hadn't been cultivated. In February 2015, Baidu began to prioritize the Nuomi business more, spinning it off from the LBS division, with Baidu Vice President Zheng Liang appointed as general manager. They capitalized on events like Girls' Day, Foodie Festival, and Qixi with monthly subsidies and major promotions. This achieved a single-day revenue record of over 350 million. In less than 2 quarters, Nuomi's market share grew by 10%, new users tripled, it covered over 400 cities, and held the #1 market share in 60 cities. That was Baidu Nuomi's most glorious period. The tripling of new users shows the immense effort and money poured into it during those 2 months. In June, Robin Li made a very famous declaration at a Baidu Nuomi strategic press conference. Baidu currently has over 50 billion in cash on its books, and I am prepared to spend at least 20 billion to make Nuomi successful.
This was meant to intimidate competitors.
I estimate, yes, there were later claims from friends inside Baidu that out of that 20 billion, 10 billion was calculated based on Baidu search traffic, not actual cash. While reasonable, at the time, it was quite a bold declaration. By then, the entire group buying market was no longer like the early 1000 group buy war. It had completely transformed into an agent war. Alibaba had established Nukube, Tencent had Dianping, and Meituan, with investments from both Alibaba and Tencent, was also thriving. The battle lines were unclear, and there was already a gradual trend towards mergers and acquisitions, with many such strategic plays. At that time, Baidu's initial negotiations were with. They negotiated with Meituan before it fully achieved market dominance. The discussion at the time was about a stock swap. On the 22nd of September 2015, Robin Li and Xing Wang met. After an afternoon of communication, they reached a preliminary cooperation plan, Baidu Takeout, which we'll mention later. It was already established, and Meituan Takeout would swap shares at a 3-to-7 ratio, with Baidu also investing in Meituan, and Baidu Nuomi and Meituan developing independently. This series of collaborations essentially amounted to a deep, strategically binding partnership. As soon as this deal was discussed, the news leaked, and it startled one person, Tao Zhang, the founder of Dianping. One day during the 2015 National Day holiday, Xing Wang, Tao Zhang, and 3 other key figures flew to Hong Kong for negotiations. Yes, during the long holiday. Indeed, the business world is unpredictable and ever-changing. On the last day of the long holiday, Meituan and Dianping suddenly announced their merger. This event had a massive impact on the entire industry at the time. It was a major turning point. During the negotiations, Baidu was actually very anxious because they had intelligence. After receiving this intelligence, Baidu's vice president of strategy conveyed Robin Li's stance to Tao Zhang, saying, "Our CEO, Mr. Li, has said that Baidu can acquire Dianping. Tao Zhang, you can come to Baidu and be in charge of our entire O2O business." Later, Tao Zhang refused, citing a lack of sincerity. He felt that Baidu was just stringing him along and wasn't genuinely interested in an acquisition. He could sense it himself. This was similar to what we mentioned when discussing Sohu earlier, how Baidu tried to delay Sugu's strategic partnership with Tencent, trying to prevent the merger. Everyone could see what was happening, but they were ultimately scooped. In October, Meituan and Dianping officially merged, becoming what was then called New Meituan Dianping. The person who took over Baidu Nuomi had made a bold promise that year. Before the end of 2015, I will become the second largest player in the group buying industry, or I will resign. Now, he didn't have to resign, they merged, and he became second. The Meituan-Dianping merger brought about a disruptive change to the entire agent war. Alibaba was originally a crucial strategic partner of Meituan, and they had a long honeymoon period. So, with the situation having changed, Alibaba had no choice but to support me, which it continues to do to this day.
At the time, there were also various rumors that Xing Wang was disobedient. Yes.
After several trips to Hangzhou, the negotiations ultimately fell through. There were various rumors about it. Nuomi and Baidu Takeout were quickly left behind. When the #1 and #2 merged, the #3 was in a very difficult position. If #2 and #3 had merged, there might have been a fighting chance, but this situation was completely different. Baidu quickly announced its abandonment of the O2O business. Baidu Nuomi was directly integrated into the search engine system, managed by the search department, gradually phasing out its group buying business and transitioning to an advertising business for local life services. In 2022, Baidu Nuomi officially ceased services.
It was still around until 2020.
Nuomi's problem wasn't just strategic, it also had an organizational issue, which was equally important. Broadly speaking, you could say Baidu simply lacked the gene for offline business. You might ask, doesn't Baidu have many search agents? Doesn't it have a large sales force? Why couldn't they succeed with offline promotion? It's because the offline promotion team and Baidu's advertising sales team were vastly different. At that time, Baidu's KPI settings were actually very vague and crude. They didn't have large-scale refined management because, as I said before, Baidu's sales team made money effortlessly. Advertisers lined up every day to give you money. You just had to arrange a meeting, and that was it. This is completely different from an offline promotion team who would painstakingly brave the scorching sun and bitter cold, one by one, to negotiate with merchants, build relationships, and discuss very specific detailed meal items, coupons, and cooperation models. The difference in attention to detail was huge. Offline promotion back then was incredibly tough and tiring. It especially required wolf nature and felt like hand-to-hand combat. If Dianping had already talked to a merchant, Meituan would also go one by one to sign them up. This is completely different from sitting in an office waiting for business to come to you. When we discuss Meituan later, everyone might have a stronger sense of this. Meituan's Iron Army is also well known, and we'll have more details. We've talked about Nuomi here. Beyond Nuomi, we also need to mention food delivery. Recently, in the new food delivery war, after JD.com entered the market, weren't they wearing red uniforms? Richard Liu himself came out to promote. Many netizens at the time said, "These three colors are quite interesting, like a Three Kingdoms battle." I talked to some friends and I found that many people, not because they were young and hadn't experienced it, but simply forgot that Baidu Takeout was also red back then. About 10 years ago, there was a scene with those three primary colors standing together. I don't remember it. See, you forgot. I remember it so clearly back then. No impression.
Xiaolei doesn't even remember. If you put it that way, it's possible you've never even used Baidu Takeout. That can't be right. You should have. Here's a picture. Everyone can visualize it in their minds.
This is a photo from about 10 years ago. It's the most iconic meme image in my memory. 3 delivery riders picking up orders simultaneously. Those 3 primary colors, blue, yellow, red, those were the primary colors of the time. Let's rewind to 2014. Back then, Baidu's national channel director, Zhen Binggong, transferred to the LBS business unit and spearheaded the creation of a department called the Innovation Business Development Department. He gathered some people and started to test the waters, saying, "Let's do innovative business." What kind of innovative business? Food delivery. Early employees recalled that Me and Meituan were already fiercely battling it out in universities. We'll touch on this later when we discuss food delivery. It initially started in universities because of the concentrated population, which made the entire process easier. They simply didn't have the capacity to focus on the white-collar market, so they looked for an untapped niche. At that time, food delivery orders relied on merchants for their own delivery. So restaurants on the platform primarily fell into 2 categories. One was KFC and McDonald's, which had their own mature delivery systems. The other type was fly restaurants, small, often informal eateries. These fly restaurants also had their own conditions. 50% of their orders relied on food delivery platforms. To attract high-quality merchants, they decided to handle delivery themselves. Among the 3 companies, Baidu was the first to do this. This is what dedicated delivery is today. Today, dedicated delivery is very common. It means helping merchants with delivery. Baidu Takeout's order volume, when it first launched, actually saw very good results. In the 3rd quarter of 2015, Baidu Takeout's dedicated delivery orders in Beijing were 10 times that of Meituan Takeout. At that time, Meituan Takeout's commander-in-chief, Wang Huiwen, Old Wang, when interviewed by a 36Care reporter, said that in that era, Meituan regarded Baidu as its biggest competitor. Me was looked down upon. The 20 billion yuan mentioned earlier, although it referred to Nuomi, actually also included the food delivery business. 2015 was the year of fierce O2O battles. The food delivery war began. In August 2015, Me announced the completion of its F-series financing totaling $630 million. 3 months later, they signed a framework agreement with Alibaba. Alibaba Group invested 12.5% in Me, totaling $500 million. This money was clearly meant to be burned. In January 2016, the merged New Meituan Dianping announced the completion of over $3.3 billion in financing. It truly soared. The financing rose to over $3 billion, including Tencent, with an investment valuation exceeding $15 billion. Baidu Takeout's strategy went wrong at this point. While the war hadn't ended, and before they had built up order volume and user stickiness, they started to build an ecosystem. This might be related to Baidu's previous strategic approach and Baidu Takeout's habits, believing they should focus on the back end. In October 2015, Baidu Takeout invested in and established Zhenxuan Food Company to create central kitchens. They registered multiple catering trademarks, including Gongda Late Night Snack, Shiqi Rice, Yujia Afternoon Tea, Dingwei Yuan, and others. I specifically want to mention the Gongda brand. Many people at the time said, "Isn't this a bit too sycophantic?" Because the boss's surname was Gong, referring to Zhen Binggong mentioned earlier, and Gongda was what everyone in the company called him. So, treating it as a major strategic investment for Baidu Takeout, those who knew a little bit of the inside story felt it was a bit too insular. Yes, it was too sycophantic, a bit like a lapdog. This project was a strategic misstep. Another strategic misstep was in 2016 when Baidu Takeout grandly announced, "For Chinese New Year, we won't compete with them. We're giving our riders a holiday." We'll even help them buy tickets home. If you can't get tickets, riders, I'll buy them. This sounds good, of course. But from an employee's perspective, you're a good employee, but you're still fighting a war. What are you saying? During wartime, soldiers, everyone go home and celebrate New Year first. New Year is important. Conversely, Meituan and Me were aggressively recruiting at that time. We'll give bonuses, we'll give double bonuses, we'll restore delivery capacity as quickly as possible. At that time, Baidu Takeout faced the problem that after New Year, they couldn't recruit anyone. Everyone had already been poached by these two companies.
You give your riders a holiday.
The riders go to steal your home to attack your base. There's another issue, similar to group buying, the offline team. Baidu Takeout used the same approach as Baidu's advertising sales agents, allowing local agents to operate. It wasn't direct management. Meituan and Me, especially Meituan, invested a lot of effort into refined operations. You rarely hear of, say, an entire province or even a city, just casually finding an agent to take over all of Meituan's offline business, only taking a commission, right? It's all directly managed. At that time, Baidu habitually outsourced difficult and tiring tasks to others. But these outsourcing companies, these agent companies, wouldn't consider the headquarters' interests. Many times, their mindset was, I'll fleece the platform, fleece the merchants, make a quick buck, and then leave. They wouldn't particularly care about Baidu's reputation or long-term value. The corporate culture was also difficult to transmit. To put it bluntly, corruption was a very serious problem. Corruption was rampant in both Nuomi and food delivery. For example, in Nuomi, media reported at the time that with subsidies, unscrupulous merchants would collude with internal staff to set up a virtual restaurant on Baidu Nuomi. This could also be done with food delivery. After setting up a virtual restaurant, if you swiped 100,000 yuan in traffic every month, Baidu would give back 10,000 yuan. The 100,000 was fake, but that 10,000 was real money from Baidu. If your supervision isn't in place, with this kind of internal and external collusion, soon you have one restaurant, then several more, and you don't know how much wool they can fleece.
And there's no cost. This is the same principle as the empty mileage during the ride-hailing wars later on.
Also, in the early days of the RBS business unit, as we mentioned, during its golden, more prosperous era, everyone approached things with an entrepreneurial spirit. So there wasn't as much of what you'd call internal conflict. But by this point, the headcount had grown significantly. How many people? Just the food delivery department at headquarters had over 4,000 employees. This was completely different from the small, innovative team it once was. Departmental complexity soared. One employee recalled, I'd report something to my superior, but he was constrained by other departments and couldn't make a decision. I'd have to report to another boss. If those two disagreed, my task would just be stuck in limbo.
Friends from big tech companies.
Hearing this, it should sound familiar. The earliest veterans, in the midst of complex internal struggles, successively resigned. Vice President Chen Jinghui resigned in 2017, along with the logistics head, 2 other vice presidents, and the product director. Key veterans and core figures all resigned, or were fought out. One of the most well-known departures was Fu Zhongwang. Fu Zhongwang, as mentioned, is now the head of Meituan's food delivery war, having just been interviewed by Late Post recently. He is the CEO of local commerce. What does CEO of local commerce mean? It means Meituan's CEO of local commerce. This included both in-store and home delivery, meaning group buying and food delivery, the whole range. You can consider him the second in command. After Wang Huiwen, old Wang, retired, Fu Zhongwang became the number 2. This number 2 came from Baidu Takeout back then. Just think about it, you couldn't retain talent. When Fu Zhongwang left Baidu for Meituan, he quickly joined Meituan's core S team. You can understand the S team as Meituan's cabinet. He was only 34 when he joined the S team, younger than us now. Looking at it today, he's considered Meituan's crown prince. You see, they couldn't retain talent. Another issue was operational efficiency. It seemed like everyone had high order volumes, but you have to know that many orders, as mentioned earlier, were gray product orders, essentially fake. Even if an order wasn't fake, they still couldn't retain customers. Baidu Takeout subsidy rate remained stubbornly high, at one point approaching 20%. In July 2016, they started reducing subsidies. Media reported that in July alone, Baidu Takeout's market share dropped by 4 percentage points. As soon as subsidies were cut, it quickly plummeted. It was all built on burning money with subsidies. In October 2016, something else happened. Robin Li suddenly announced that Baidu would transform into an AI company. He said, "We're completely done with the dirty and tiring work." Baidu's resources quickly dwindled. They were unwilling to subsidize anymore and started to save themselves. At that time, Baidu Takeout's chief strategy officer, Wei Di, spent the entire second half of the year running around for funding in Hong Kong and the US trying to raise money. Finally, investors said, "Your order volume is good because of subsidies, but your subsidy rate is too high. You need to prove your profitability." How to prove profitability? They had to start increasing commissions. Tencent Technology wrote in a report on the 8th of May 2017 that this approach indeed boosted profits in the short term. For example, revenue in a certain area of Beijing increased 7-fold by the end of December. Revenue increased sevenfold, but negative effects quickly emerged. The commission rate was too high. Some merchants had already started diverting Baidu takeout orders to Meituan or LA. Me. You haven't even said.
When they monopolize the market, they do this. Even though it's wrong to do this when you have a monopoly, everyone does it, right?
You have to maintain balance. Even if you monopolize the market, if you raise your commission rate too quickly, people won't play along. At that time, some merchants even directly wrote in their Baidu takeout store descriptions, Baidu takeout delivery fees are too high. We recommend you order elsewhere, not from here. You let merchants do things like that. The final outcome was predictable, a continuous decline. I wonder if Xiaolei still remembers this ending. You should have an impression. Baidu did food delivery, but what was the fate of Baidu takeout?
No impression. No impression.
It was acquired. On the 24th of August 2017, LA, Mi announced its merger with Baidu Takeout. Many people were shocked at the time that a rival they had fought for so many years was directly acquired, and by Ella, Mi no less. So, if you're a friend who misses Baidu Takeout back then, as mentioned earlier, Baidu Takeout focused on quality food delivery. You could order many excellent meals through it, and many friends still miss it. If you do, then ordering from Ili, Mi today is like paying tribute to Baidu Takeout. After the acquisition and merger, Ella. Mi founder Zhang Shuhao said that Baidu Takeout would operate independently, and CEO Zhen Binggong would continue to lead. Of course, we all know now that all such merger announcements are just window dressing. In October 2018, the Baidu Takeout brand disappeared and was renamed LA, Mi Xingxuan. Some friends might vaguely remember Xingxuan, referring to slightly more upscale restaurants. In February 2023, LA Mi Xingxuan completely ceased operations and Baidu Takeout truly vanished. This was Baidu's big bet, or rather, something the entire company poured its resources into, besides the mobile search, mobile assistant, and input method departments led by Mingyu and Li. As mentioned earlier, they invested a lot of energy, manpower, and resources into O2O. And it wasn't just betting on Nuomi and food delivery. They also successively invested in many companies like Yuxin Used Car, Woyaoyongche, Tiantianyongche, Keruyun, Baixing.com, Yidaishi, and a large number of other O2O companies. In the ride-hailing war, Baidu invested in Uber. The winner of ride-hailing, as we later learned, was Didi, which was backed by Alibaba and Tencent. Although Uber later merged with Didi, Baidu didn't gain much. Looking back at all the O2O things Baidu Maps did at the time, Baidu Maps is of course still very mainstream today, firmly holding the second position. Many friends might not even know that Tencent Maps exists, or at least don't use it much. It's mainly Gaud and Baidu. However, Baidu Maps today indeed doesn't really mention O2O anymore. This is the only legacy of the entire O2O strategy. After this, Baidu basically stopped doing local service or retail businesses, moving everything online. All these were phased out in 2016. You have to consider one thing. Today we think Baidu doing AI and purely online products sounds quite reasonable. That's our impression of Baidu. But think about it, at that point in 2016, Baidu had lost a lot of face. It's also a Beijing-based company.
I see some friends saying, how can they be so self-contradictory? They always think this way.
You have to be tough on yourself. Think about how long BAT was a common term. Baidu was even considered a better Chinese internet company than Tencent and Alibaba. Yet, in the O2O war, it suffered a crushing defeat. Although Tencent and Alibaba achieved a lot through investments and mergers, they ultimately dominated the market, dividing it between them. Whether it was food delivery, ride-hailing, or various other sectors, Tencent and Alibaba gained significant advantages. Even if you say, they burned through a lot of money in subsidy wars, but Tencent and Alibaba's offline payments took off, while Baidu Pay didn't really succeed. Of course, Okay, let's get back to Baidu's AI. Before talking about AI, we have to mention a few incidents that happened in 2016. These were also among the reasons Robin Li decided to suddenly transform and say, I'm stopping everything else to focus on AI. What incidents? Actually, everyone should have some impression of this. On the 9th of January 2016, a netizen posted that Baidu Tiaba's hemophilia forum had been sold. The original forum moderators were replaced, and a hemophilia expert, Professor Liu Shangxi, who claimed to be the director of a major hemophilia research institute in Shaanxi, was introduced as the new forum owner. On January 10, Zhihu user Ant Vegetable posted on Zhihu, stating that he was the original second-largest moderator of Baidu Tiaba's hemophilia forum. But the forum moderators, including himself, were directly replaced by a single post and a new forum owner was parachuted in. He couldn't even post normally anymore. This handling was extremely brutal. In November, the new forum owner, whose ID was Hemophilia Expert, an ID that looks very simple and crude, took office. After taking office, he started posting, stating that he had formed a consulting team with many hemophilia-related experts to accurately answer patients' questions. He explained his previous deletion of posts, claiming he was entrusted by Baidu to manage the forum. Then everyone discovered that this hemophilia expert ID and some related IDs were actually members of a major hemophilia research institute in Shaanxi. This was exposed. After that, netizen YTYTT exposed that nearly 40% of popular disease-related forums had been sold. Most users search for medical information through Baidu and even completely trust this information. Besides saying it was shameless, I found myself truly powerless, and he explicitly stated that he had done a lot of research and found that the cooperation methods varied. The sold TIBA forums could be categorized into quack hospital contracted type, for example, the hyperthyroidism forum, expert contracted type, for example, the Parkinson's forum, advertising platform contracted type, for example, the cerebral palsy forum, group contracted type, for example, the onychomycosis forum, and website contracted type, for example, the teeth forum. So there were all sorts of models, and their selling methods were adapted to local conditions, very flexible. This matter is clearly linked to what we discussed last time. At this stage, Baidu Tieba, this axis we just talked about, unconsciously slid to the other end. It moved further and further away from users. It was entirely sales-driven, directly selling off forums. And one thing I want to emphasize about this axis is that it wasn't, as people might imagine, Robin Li himself moving it back and forth. In a large company, the shift of this axis is actually the result of many interests and many people's negotiations. It means the sales department's influence grew, and even if it was just a little bit, it would eventually push this axis further in that direction. It's a subtle thing we've always talked about. Yes. Clearly, if you look at people's reports, their weekly and monthly reports, you'll see a lot of things related to user experience and product in their work content. But ultimately, who has the final say on whether a Taiba forum can be sold still depends on everyone's KPIs and the outcome of interdepartmental negotiations. The waters here are still deep. From the Tiba incident, it's clear that the product team's influence was definitely not that high. Baidu quickly admitted its mistake and completely stopped all commercial cooperation for disease-related forums, opening them only to authoritative public welfare organizations. But this incident primarily caused a severe decline in public trust and had a terrible impact. Many people later brought it up, saying, "You sold the forums." They didn't care how you eventually resolved the issue. Public incidents are always like this. And there's a crucial point about Taiba. It's not like you created a product yourself and then sold it. You sold a Taiba forum that people had painstakingly built over many years. In principle, the intellectual property of the content should belong to the Tiba Friends users. The Tiba Friends built these forums for so many years. It's like you painstakingly built a forum and suddenly the higher-ups say, "I'm selling it." Why do they have the right to sell something we built?
This is a very important line of thought.
This really disheartened everyone and eroded public trust. Many people's affection for Baidu Tieba was immediately extinguished. This was something Baidu had back then, as we've repeatedly mentioned. Whether competing with 360 or Shenma Search, Tieba, Baidu Baike, and Baidu Knows were all Baidu's most unique and important tools, which even Google couldn't beat back then. They were a very important content product, a content barrier. Now you're saying, what you did is like Liu Xiang selling his own legs. You just gave up on them, completely abandoning any future development. This was a short-sighted remedy. Although this incident caused a lot of controversy at the time, it was far less controversial than what happened next. Also in the same year, in April, born in Xianyang, Shang Xixi, it happened in Shaanxi again, Zexiwei, a sophomore at CDN University, was found to have advanced synovial sarcoma. After undergoing chemotherapy and radiotherapy, he found a hospital through a Baidu search. This hospital was called the Oncology Biological Center of the 2nd Hospital of the Beijing Armed Police Corps. He tried a treatment called tumor biological immunotherapy. He paid a large amount in medical expenses, about 200,000 yuan, which was quite a lot back then, and spent a lot of time, but with no effect. On the 12th of April 2016, he died from the illness. Before his death, Zexiwei posted on Jihu answering the question, "What is the greatest evil in human nature?" He believed the doctors at this hospital were fraudulent. The entire therapy had already been withdrawn from clinical trials in the United States starting in 2015, deemed not a very mature or effective treatment. So why could this discarded therapy be used in hospitals in China? Initially, he mainly blamed the hospital, but later he also believed the platform should bear some responsibility because this advertisement was seen on Baidu. Baidu, don't you have a responsibility for supervision and review? This incident then blew up. To what extent? After his death in April, on the 25th of April 2016, Xinhua News Agency published the full text of Xi Jinping's speech from April 19. The speech mentioned that website operators should not blindly pursue click-through rates, online shop owners should guard against counterfeits, social media platforms should not become rumor spreaders, and search engines should not solely use the amount of money paid as the standard for ranking. These words were very specific and clear, and the issue concerning Baidu was emphasized at the very end. Half a month later, Baidu Vice President Zhang Shengwang was fired by Baidu for violating professional ethics and harming company interests. The media at the time speculated that he was made a scapegoat and left. As mentioned earlier, they were the providers of cellular immunotherapy technology, so in this, it was an exchange of interests orchestrated by themselves. After this incident came to light, 2 Putian-affiliated companies listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange saw their shares plummet. Baidu's market value also plunged, dropping 8 points and shrinking by $5.4 billion. On May 9, the The Joint Investigation Team of the Cyberspace Administration of China announced its findings, concluding that Baidu indeed bore responsibility and demanded rectification. We won't go into the specific rectification details, there were many. It's equivalent to what was mentioned before. It had hit its peak, hit a wall. In business, that axis hit a wall on the commercial side. It was the force of society, the collective power of society, including regulatory bodies, that unanimously pulled his arm back, swinging it back towards the user side. But netizens also discovered that after the rectification, in mid-June, medical advertisements reappeared on Baidu. In November, someone found that advertisements for Putin-affiliated hospitals had reappeared. Of course, they avoided a large number of ads for more serious, high-risk diseases. More often, it was medical aesthetics. Today, there are still many medical advertisements. This is what we said before. We can't blame Baidu for what it's doing now. We can, how should I put it, criticize it from a personal moral standpoint. But the commercial actions it actually takes from a purely business perspective are understandable. They just remove the problematic ones. But still, as we said before, the public's trust in you is at 60 points. If you don't achieve 100, you're still stuck at 60. It's as if they're saying, I'd even be content with 59 points, but you're only giving me 58. There's always this subjective emotional response.
It should be because the way of making money is relatively fixed. So,
it's still a matter of attitude. His attitude, the entire company's attitude, if it can be swayed towards the commercial side, it will naturally continue to flow more in that commercial direction. Today, Baidu still has a large number of medical advertisements. If you just search for something, for example, I search for gastritis, toothache, hair loss, premature ejaculation, cosmetic surgery, onychomycosis, and so on, the first results are all ads.
could you elaborate on the connection between hair loss and cosmetic surgery? Why would someone search for that?
These aren't keywords that easily cause problems. They're all advertisements, and the quality of these ads is clearly inconsistent. For those life-threatening illnesses, you can't find these ads for now. And as mentioned earlier, Xiaolei also pointed out that this is one of Baidu's biggest revenue sources. They haven't completely severed ties with this revenue stream. In 2015, Baidu's advertising business accounted for 84% of its revenue. This remains its core business, and it's genuinely profitable. I also found a report dug up by the media at the time, which was quite shocking. In 2011, Putin-affiliated hospitals once accused Baidu. We always imagined Putin-affiliated hospitals and Baidu had a honeymoon relationship, but they had huge complaints about Baidu, saying it was outrageous. They said at the time that buying keywords on Baidu, for example, best male infertility hospital, could cost 600 yuan per click. That's the cost per click for a user to click once. It's not that I actually closed a deal with you, rather it proves it's a violent industry. In 2011, the average spend of a Baidu advertiser was 14,400 yuan. By 2014, it had soared to 59,000 yuan. This increase to 59,000 yuan doesn't mean that everyone in the advertising industry was willing to pay more. It means Baidu raised its prices very aggressively. The Pudian system businesses at the time reported that they were required to pre-deposit funds into their Baidu promotion accounts. Only by meeting Baidu's annual growth targets could they receive rebates of 30% to 40% of the funds. This was a forced requirement to deposit more money. Baidu's growth targets were typically 10% to 20% annually, but suddenly they jumped to 40% this year. If you deposited 100,000 last year, you'd have to deposit 140,000 or 150,000 this year. It was very much a seller's market. That's why, as mentioned earlier, doing group buying or food delivery wasn't this kind of scenario at all. You could just lie back and demand they give you money. A Putin system advertising agent named Huang Xin told Caixin reporters that Baidu's dominance was too strong. It was literally driving people to their deaths. The cost of keyword searches sometimes surged to 2,000 yuan per click. Some hospitals reported certain clicks costing 4,000 yuan each. You see, isn't this a mutually reinforcing effect? Ultimately, hospitals would think, I have to earn this money back. The end result is that it seems no one is responsible for this, and it brings us back to what we often call the evil of poverty. The cruel part of what Baidu did was that those who were less internet savvy, those who hadn't skillfully mastered the ability to distinguish true from false information, were more easily deceived. Especially those with lower education levels or older people were more susceptible to being scammed. It's like online scams today. Wealthier people are actually less likely to be scammed. Many honest people, many who spent their entire lives saving 1 million yuan and put it in the bank, had 900,000 yuan stolen. Things like that are just incredibly frustrating to witness. This was the phenomenon everyone saw back then.
On one hand, it's frustrating, and on the other, some people are making light of it, saying, I'm just redistributing wealth.
Speaking of this, I also often ponder a question. Do all search engines have to face such problems? Xiaolei also said, very realistically, that Google also had advertising as its main source of income early on. But Google truly didn't encounter this problem. We have a control group. We can see that Google handled it better. On one hand, very early on, its ranking system heavily weighted the quality of ads. Additionally, in terms of labeling, Baidu later, after launching the Fengchao system, gradually became more rigorous and cautious with its labeling. But Google, from the very beginning, marked ads very clearly. Even more importantly, regulation in the United States is indeed stricter. For example, to promote online pharmacies in the US, you need to obtain certification from third-party organizations like LegitScript, and it's forbidden to promote unapproved drugs or therapies with misleading health claims. The XiaoyuzhouFM incident could not have happened on Google. It had already strictly vetted things up front. Baidu, on the other hand, was essentially saying, if the law doesn't forbid it, I'll try my best to push forward and do it. But in the process, how should I put it? These kinds of problems would arise. It's the same old saying, the control lever doesn't just have two settings, be a good person or be a bad person. It's not that it doesn't want to be a good person. Rather, it unconsciously slides towards commercial interests.
Some of those reasons anyway were covered in the last episode. A large part of this episode has also been heard by everyone. It seems that all the efforts and attempts they made during this process were not very successful. They couldn't replace this thing.
So, 2016 was a turning point. You see, all these things we're talking about happened in 2016. Why did it need to transform? Also, Baidu's mobile strategy, which received relatively positive evaluations in 2014 and 2015, started to turn negative. Because previously, Baidu's products were clean and straightforward, but now they were like a certain digital company, similar to 360, with forced installations and a family bucket that was hard to uninstall. That's when the term Baidu Family Bucket first appeared, starting in 2016. You thought you only installed one Baidu product, but actually they installed them all for you, one by one, Baidu Guard, Baidu Antivirus, Baidu Browser, and so on. They installed everything, whether you used it or not. This phenomenon still exists on Android phones today, though it's not as severe. Xiaolei, take a look. Some netizens at the time created a very interesting family bucket image.
Oh, this image is very elaborate. It was originally an ad page that was modified.
Because the family bucket was originally introduced by KFC, this is the background for using the KFC family bucket concept. But he simply replaced the bucket, which originally contained various chicken pieces with various Baidu products, and there were so many of them. On the left, there's Golden Crispy Chicken, New Year Bucket. It felt like there were 30 products. Logos of many Baidu apps were all plastered on it. So, how should I put it? Like the controversies Baidu faced in 2009, those were temporary. People knew there were problems, but they didn't develop strong emotional dislike towards Baidu. However, in 2016, a considerable number of netizens genuinely developed a strong dislike for Baidu. Emotionally, it became hard to accept. So, this also affected Baidu's finances. That year, Baidu's revenue growth dropped to only 6%. During the same period, Tencent and Alibaba were in their prime, with growth rates of 50%. Baidu's market capitalization fell to $60 billion. It was no longer the top of BAT, it was falling behind. 2016 was a year of misfortune. This series of events made Robin Li realize what Xiaolei also mentioned. If I just cling to the old advertising revenue, I will definitely run into problems. Food delivery and takeout didn't seem to be our forte, and with the family bucket, I couldn't keep iterating on it just for money. So, the decision was made to transform into artificial intelligence. Others had to make up their minds. We now come to the fourth chapter, Phoenix Rebirth, the difficulty of finding the path. After the O2O war, coupled with various events in 2016, Baidu's morale was shaken. 2016 was a period of severe talent loss. To be honest, the issues Baidu faced in 2016 indirectly contributed to the maturity of many companies, especially ByteDance, Meituan, Pinduoduo, Didi, and others. If you look into it, their core technical personnel basically came from Baidu. Many companies' CTOs even came from Baidu. It truly lived up to its reputation as a Whampoa military academy, as we mentioned before. This only refers to a subset of people, but Baidu truly nurtured the technical teams of the entire Chinese internet industry. This includes Mingyuan Li, who also left in 2016. This was equivalent to a huge transformation. Baidu was going to become a completely different company. It was going to turn over a new leaf. A very encouraging piece of news about this transformation came in January 2017. Baidu announced the appointment of Qi Lu as president and COO of Baidu Group, responsible for product, technology, sales, marketing, and operations. This covered almost everything, at least on paper, making him the second in command under Robin Li. At the time, it even seemed he was higher than He Longxiang. He was given immense power. It felt like, in a time of crisis, he was brought in to completely steer Baidu onto a new path, as if he was given military command. We discussed Qi Lu's early career in episode 44 of Bandati Zhangpian. He was the highest-ranking Chinese person in the American tech industry at the time. Today, that might not be the case, as there's also Jensen Huang. And unlike Jensen Huang, Qi Lu is a native-born mainland Chinese from Shanghai, not an overseas Chinese. He rose to vice president at Microsoft and almost became Microsoft's CEO. Microsoft's current success is largely due to him. He was the overall head of early AI and cloud initiatives. He was also the founder of Bing. Robin Li once said in an interview with China Business News, Qi Lu is a talent that the whole world seeks. He truly elevated Qi Lu to a very high position. In 2017, Robin Li and Qi Lu had a somewhat divided responsibility. They decided on a broad division of labor. Robin Li would be responsible for existing businesses, stabilizing the cash flow and cash cows to keep printing money. Qilu would develop new second curve businesses. Robin Li personally oversaw the information feed business, which can be understood as Baidu's version of Taotiao. It transformed the original mobile Baidu, a pure search engine, into an information feed product. Speaking of this, a few years earlier, Baidu had indeed researched the information feed market. Robin Li believed it had no prospects. That was too early. When mining computing was proposed in 2011, the entire team had already suggested it. Should we do information feeds? Should we do recommendation algorithms? Robin Li made many attempts. You could truly say it was a matter of timing and fate. The attempts made in 2011 were not accepted by users didn't like them, and the recommendation effects were poor. At that time, Toutiao truly didn't exist yet. Yes, it was much earlier than Toutiao. So when Toutiao first came out, not just Baidu, I remember very clearly, I was at Didi at the time, and even within Didi, although we weren't in the same industry, the general consensus was that Toutiao wouldn't succeed, that it couldn't be done. How could recommendation algorithms make this work? There was simply no, how should I put it, standing at that point in time, the perspective was different. So you see, this itself is part of the baggage of a big company. The times have changed, and the conclusions from your past experiments are actually outdated. But you always feel, I've done experiments before, why do I need to do them again? There's no need. It truly is a problem. At that time, much of Robin Li's energy was focused on content providers like Baidu Baike and Baijiahao. For example, Baijiahao was founded in 2016, aiming to provide its own UGC content. At that time, personal websites and small websites had almost disappeared. He had to find a way to provide landing pages for Baidu Search, and Baijiahao was the solution. In 2018, Robin Li also launched the Million Annual Salary Plan, meaning he aimed to help creators earn 1 million yuan a year. At the same time, Baidu successively invested in Qimao Novel, Zhihu, Butterfly Interactive, Kaishu Story, Yuzan, Guoker, NetEase Cloud Music, and others, and formed strategic partnerships with Bilibili and RedNote. This was all to get more content. He actually did a lot. He was very worried that in the future, the search engine wouldn't have content providers. So, his strategy was still based on the intermediate page logic, through which these content providers could first cooperate with him. In fact, we might also feel that many of the content platforms just mentioned are relatively in decline. In 2017, it's said that Ma Dongmin, Robin Li's wife, who later became a very important core decision maker at Baidu, specifically went to ask Perfect World, to whom Baidu Literature had been sold. Can we get Baidu Literature back? This was a business Robin Li decided to divest because he wanted to focus on search technology. Now everyone wants to bring it back. Meanwhile, their own original content, whether it's Baidu Knows or Baidu Tieba, is still relying on old assets. His decision to sell Baidu Tieba already showed that he had reached a stage where he was, how should I put it, only taking in, not giving out. Overall, Robin Li spent a lot of time and effort, and the results were quite good. By the end of 2018, the average daily active users of the Baidu app had reached 160 million. Toutiao's DAU at the time was 120 million. Baidu had managed to boost its numbers. However, user retention time was 40 minutes for Baidu compared to 90 minutes for Taoqiao. This was a significant gap. Moreover, we all know that even if your DAU is high now, the problems you can solve are vastly different from what Baidu's PC search engine could solve back then. Its standing in the industry is different. Now, you're still talking about specific scenarios, users' needs are different. Back then, for many things, you could ask Baidu if you were unsure. But now, many uncertainties can be resolved on various platforms. It's only for those fragmented, trivial, seemingly unimportant matters that people might still think of searching on a search engine. In 2019, Fang Kecheng, a media professional who is now also doing a podcast, wrote an article titled "Search Engine Baidu is Dead." Just the title alone made this article go viral. The article criticized Baidu's content, which now primarily comes from Baijiahao, essentially Baidu feeding itself. The content on Baijiahao is often of very poor quality, with many articles clearly AI-generated marketing content. This has led to users being unable to find truly valuable information from third-party websites. Baidu is no longer the search engine it once was. It has become an internal site search, drawing a circle on the ground as a prison. This is the experience of many people. The article trended on hot searches. Of course, the outcome it described cannot be said to be wrong. It's just that, from the perspective of the reasons, this wasn't Baidu's choice. Baidu had no other option. It had no choice but to draw a circle on the ground as a prison because no one wanted to play with it anymore. No content providers were willing to give Baidu money. We should have discussed this logic before. Let me reiterate, if you don't mind. Wherever consumer behavior occurs, that's where money can be made. Why are platforms like RedNote and Taobao unwilling to provide content to Baidu? It's not because they think Baidu can't win them over. Baidu can certainly provide them with a steady stream of traffic and users. But if the actual consumption behavior, and by consumption, I don't mean spending money, but the act of truly seeing and engaging with information, were to happen on Baidu, then Baidu would have a way to monetize it, whether through bidding ads or ad placements. The so-called traffic entry point is where, Taobao is also an advertising company. Taobao doesn't primarily make money by taking commissions. It essentially relies on bidding ads and selling ad placements. If I could search for product information on Baidu and even complete transactions there, then what commercial value would Taobao have? None. Let's take another example. In the classical internet era, everyone loved RSS subscription products. Why did these RSS subscription products later fail? Why did geek apps, whose model used to be crawling Weibo and content from various platforms, stop doing that? It's because these platforms blocked them. They didn't want their content to be scraped. So, ultimately, Rednote, Bilibili, Douyin, and WeChat official accounts have evolved into closed platforms. We now lament that they all have a product wall. This is an inevitable outcome of commercial development. To be pessimistic, there's a saying, it's not about search engines or Baidu or the web or websites. It's about the hyperlinked internet we're familiar with. Even though, as we mentioned earlier, Google can still search some websites, the era where the 3W founders envisioned people connecting the whole world through hyperlinks between websites is completely over. Now, think about it. When was the last time you clicked a hyperlink, right? That term is already very archaic. Nowadays, you probably wouldn't even click a hyperlink to download a movie. That era is completely gone.
But this concept, this idea of not clicking hyperlinks, how should I understand it? I didn't quite grasp it before.
In the past, everything was interconnected. Websites used to recommend each other. I recommend you, you recommend me, a symbiotic relationship where content flowed freely. Now that flow is gone. Rednote's content, for example, stays exclusively within the Rednote platform.
Jumping from one website to another, that kind of thing is happening less and less, right?
But you could say that within a platform, there are still phenomena similar to hyperlinks. For example, within Rednote, I can still add other people or forward other notes. But between platforms, it's a closed island. The internet is now an island of big tech companies. It's no longer that highly fluid, very open hyperlinked era of the past.
I really had to think hard, and the last time I can recall such a scenario was probably on Zhihu, when someone recommended a good website or a good tool. That kind of situation.
People use it very rarely now. And the way we acquire information is constantly changing. As we mentioned earlier, AI is here, and that's another powerful blow. The frequency of AI usage is increasing, its market share is growing, and it's also replacing search engines. There's an interesting statistic. I'll send it to Xiaolei to take a look. A comparison of search volumes compiled by a third-party organization.
And a comparison of daily search volumes for platforms in Q4 2024. Right. This is in billions of searches. Baidu is 1 billion, Douyin is around 2.4 billion, and Rednote is around 600 million. That's roughly the level. So you know who has the highest. It's more than double Baidu's, about 2.5 times the second platform we just mentioned, Douyin. And Rednote's trend of catching up from behind is also accelerating.
This reality is increasingly impacting Baidu. So you see, back then when you searched, you were searching the entire Chinese internet. That was that era. But now, everyone's search behavior happens within various apps.
Wherever content is produced, that's where I'll go to find information.
Imagine this. Your last search might have been on Douyin, or Rednote, or Taobao, or many other platforms. But you wouldn't expect to find all information on a single platform. This is a change of era. Also, there's another interesting statistic. Let's take a look, Xiaolei.
AI tools and social platforms are attracting search engine users, becoming the top 2 search platforms. Now, in this survey, which comes from the Clowry Index Research Institute's User Search Behavior Study, over half of the respondents stated that they frequently use AI tools and social platforms for searching. Social platforms accounted for 53.3%, AI tools for 54.4%. It's not calculated as 100%, meaning you can select multiple options, and e-commerce platforms for 49.9%.
Search engines account for 21.7%. So, if we look at these statistics, AI, social platforms, and e-commerce platforms are now the absolute mainstream for search behavior. However, it's worth noting that Baidu app is still a national-level application. This might be different from what people imagine, as if everyone still searches on web or PC. That's not the case. Baidu app still has very high traffic. As of June 2025, Baidu app's MAU monthly active users is 735 million, which is half the population, with a year-on-year growth of 5%. Of course, you could say it's not as high as it once was when almost everyone used it, but it still shows year-on-year growth. To put the concept of a national-level application into perspective, let's compare horizontally. The first tier has only 3 players: WeChat, Alipay, and Douyin. This is completely understandable. The so-called BAT companies are now precisely these 3. They have massive user bases with MAUs over 1 billion, meaning almost everyone uses them. The second tier includes Taobao, Baidu, Ama, Pinduoduo, and Kuaishou, all with over 500 million MAUs. These are the only 5 in this tier. The third tier, including Weibo, Rednote, Bilibili, and Taotiao, consists of national-level applications with under 500 million MAUs. We probably have a general sense of these 3 tiers. You see, Kuaishou is still in the second tier. Speaking of the second tier, I should also mention that Baidu has another national-level application, its own short video app, Haokan Video, with 90 million MAUs and 30 million DAUs. This is also a very large platform, ranking as the fourth major force after Douyin, Kuaishou, and video accounts.
Whether it's Haokan Video or Baidu itself, my feeling from when we first started recording this show is that over the years, in various scenarios, I've received their pop-ups or various push notifications. I think this must play a very significant role in their aggressive promotion.
Exactly. Especially when you're using other Baidu-affiliated products, you'll get all sorts of pop-ups prompting you to download them. Speaking of short videos, according to a Caijing report in 2018, Qilu, Hailongxiang, and Shendo, these three individuals, who later, in many internal palace intrigue stories, were said to be at odds with each other, meaning Hailongxiang and Shendo ousted Qilu, and then Shendo ousted Hailongxiang. There are many such descriptions, but that's not important. It's just hearsay. However, at the time, these three individuals, who were reportedly not on good terms, Qilu, Hailongxiang, and Shendo, together approached Robin Li to suggest he develop a short video product. Back then, it was called Short Video. These were essentially Baidu's number 2, 3, and 4 executives. They held 2 meetings. In the first, Robin Li said he'd look into it. In the second meeting, Robin Li said no. This was reported by Caijing as the cost of the boss being too meticulous. Robin Li's personal subjective preferences and judgments influenced the entire company's decision. Even if they had just tried it then, the outcome might have been different. I've seen people give examples saying, look, Jack Ma doesn't get bogged down in details, focusing on strategy seems more appropriate. But you can't generalize like that. If you look horizontally, Dingley at NetEase is also quite meticulous. There are pros and cons to each approach, and the final outcome can't be attributed to just one event.
There are definitely various factors involved. You also have to consider, how should I put it, the extent of the decision-maker's control and influence over the overall situation, right?
There's a quote I think is worth mentioning from Robin Li during an interview with Caijing. It's quite representative. He said, "I'm not the biggest risk taker. The risks I take are always calculated, after thorough analysis and research, when I believe the risk is worth it." This statement is somewhat similar to Dingley's previous philosophy, but it gives off a slightly overly programmer-like vibe, implying a need for extensive rational analysis. So, I can only analyze it through historical context.
Actually, after telling so many stories, we keep repeating one concept. For many successful endeavors and people, while strength is undoubtedly a crucial factor, luck is absolutely indispensable. What we mean by luck is that you never know which tree will blossom or which cloud will bring rain. So perhaps more and more people are now embracing ByteDance's approach. Try first, and whatever comes out of it, that's what it is. To truly say, I'll make a big decision and it will succeed, that certainly happens, but it's usually a one-time thing. If you succeed the first time, the probability of succeeding again with another big decision is too small.
Every method, every path has its inherent pros and cons. ByteDance, for instance, was lauded to the skies a few years ago, but later encountered issues. ByteDance hasn't succeeded in everything it's done. It faced many setbacks in education and gaming. We can discuss that later. So, we can't just dismiss any path outright, as I mentioned earlier, and say it's definitely wrong. Speaking of which, let me show Xiaolei this. It's a Baidu mobile landscape. Looking at this map today, many of these, though we might not interact with them daily, are indeed still active.
This is an overview of the entire Baidu and Baidu-affiliated app distribution, showing their interconnections and how each belongs to a larger segment, such as overseas communities, video, knowledge, tools, utilities, and so on. They are quite finely categorized with specific layouts for each direction. That's roughly how it is.
The Baidu app can be considered a national-level application, and it has a lot of support behind it. For example, on one hand, there's a whole series of content like videos, Baidu Tieba, Baidu Knows, Baidu Baike, and so on. Whether through partnerships or self-operated content, these still form a very comprehensive base. At least for now, it feels like a starved camel still bigger than horse. It has many connections and a very rich content ecosystem that can provide a substantial amount of information. Furthermore, in terms of investment and partnerships, it previously invested in various products including video platforms, cloud music, Jihu, and others, which also supplied a lot of relevant content. However, how should I put it? These offerings just aren't robust enough to truly compete in scale or quality with the content ecosystems of platforms like Douyin, RedNote, or especially WeChat.
Looking at this, purely from the numbers for daily and monthly active users, I've noticed two things. First, as you might easily imagine, IQII has a monthly active user base of 590 million. Second, I saw Baidu input method. The specific year of this chart isn't certain, but here its daily active users are 453 million. In this same chart, the Baidu app itself only has 200 million daily active users. Of course, an input method can't be considered as crucial an entry point, but it still indicates that it holds a considerably large share of the market.
So, would you say Baidu completely missed the mobile internet ticket? Not really. From my own research and personal experience, Baidu invested a lot of effort, and in many aspects, it was relatively successful. Now, O2O, that's a different story. It certainly wasn't their strong suit and didn't perform well. But the mobile tools they developed, which I mentioned earlier, are still generating significant cash flow even today. It's just that their ticket, as I mentioned earlier regarding information acquisition, the entire landscape has undergone a massive transformation. When you talk about e-commerce shifting from PC to mobile, or Tencent's instant messaging moving from PC to mobile, there's always some genetic inheritance. But search engines are already a product of a bygone era. People don't rely on search engines as much today. So, the difficulty for Baidu to secure its ticket into the new era is inherently much greater than for other companies. This is a fundamental difference. Furthermore, some people analyze Baidu's DNA, claiming its technical capabilities belong to the previous era and differ from what we now call the algorithm era or recommendation era. I believe this is completely incorrect. Many core product talents actually originated from Baidu. The capability for recommendations exists. It's more about Baidu's overall strategic direction or its judgment on business development. Internally, as I said before, the recommended products simply weren't brought to fruition. It's not that they lack technical reserves. Okay, this large section I just covered was about the division of labor between Qilu and Robin Li after Qilu joined. Robin Li was primarily responsible for one part, and the other leg, of course, was what Qilu was in charge of. Qilu's slogan back then was "Solidify the mobile foundation." That was Robin Li's focus. When the AI era meant they were going all in on AI. The current cash flow was to be used to prepare for future AI. With a great general like him, at least in the short term, people believed there wouldn't be complex internal conflicts. Wherever he pointed, they could relatively hit the target. After Qilu joined, he cut many departments, such as Baidu Medical and the gaming business, even though Baidu had invested heavily in gaming. He established the Baidu AI technology platform system and personally took charge of the smart driving business group. Let's look at a detail so everyone can grasp why such a general was needed to integrate internal conflicts or fragmented issues. In the smart driving field alone, there were several large departments: the autonomous driving business unit, the smart car business unit, and the car networking business unit. They were all separate and very fragmented before. Only after he joined were they integrated, bringing together resources and talent.
This fragmentation inevitably led to some business overlap and wasted resources.
There was a lot of overlap and internal conflict, and the organizational culture needed an overhaul. Qilu tried to break down the long-standing bureaucracy and hierarchical culture, promoting a new summit, essentially a mechanism for direct dialogue between executives and frontline employees. He even mandated that employees internally stop using titles like general manager or director, encouraging everyone to communicate as equals. During his 486 days at the helm, Baidu's stock price soared from $170 all the way up to $284, and its market capitalization approached $100 billion, up from its original $50 billion. What specific businesses did he pursue in the AI strategy? There were two main ones. First, the autonomous driving or smart driving business called Apollo, which I just mentioned. And second, a conversational AI operating system named DualOS. In January 2018, Baidu released Apollo 2 inches Silicon Valley, enabling autonomous driving capabilities for simple urban roads. At this point, the ecosystem rapidly expanded, attracting numerous domestic and international partners, including Mercedes-Benz, Ford, Chery, and BAIC. Baidu also secured the first batch of T3 level autonomous driving road test licenses in Beijing, placing it at the forefront of the industry. I happened to be working at Didi at the time, and when taking a taxi on the West 2nd Ring Road, I often encountered their test vehicles. It was quite interesting. Could you hail them directly back then? Could you ride in them? No, you'd hail a car with a driver. The drivers were inside, but during the road test, they would let the AI take over partially. It was a direct, specific test. At the time, I complained to them about Baidu Maps' inaccurate navigation. They said, "We also think it's not very accurate. We'll go back and iterate. It's not our fault, definitely not our fault." Right? It has nothing to do with us. As for DualOS, I'm not sure if that's the exact translation, but DualOS was defined as the human-computer interaction entry point for the AI era. The idea was that in the future, we might not just use phones for interaction. People are still discussing this issue today. It aimed to empower smart speakers, smart TVs, in-car systems, and so on, by opening up core capabilities like speech recognition and natural language processing. It felt like an early version of an agent. Yes, back then it wasn't called an agent, it was simply called a smart speaker. Amazon was pushing it very aggressively at the time. The Amazon Echo speaker was touted as the next generation entry point, even claiming it would replace mobile phones. We all know that during that period, the Xiaodu speaker was pushed incredibly hard in 2019. In the first quarter, it shipped 3.3 million units, making it #1 nationwide. Xiaodu and Xiaoai are very popular now, but back then, Xiaodu was solidly #1. Although the speakers sold so well, they were sold at a loss. Today, we all know that smart speakers still haven't become a smart entry point beyond mobile phones. Everyone has experienced it. You might use it to control curtains like Xiaolei just mentioned, and that's fine. But if you truly want to solve many problems through a smart speaker, it's still not efficient enough.
I just have to vent a little. I have a Xiaoai speaker at home, and I can only speak from personal experience. It's not that it's completely useless, it's the network issues that I still can't resolve. It's not that it doesn't work at all, it just fails to perform when it's supposed to. And it's not just one specific speaker or model, like it being deaf and not hearing or being overly sensitive. The network is incredibly unstable. Since I have both a Xiaoyi speaker and a Tmall Genie at home, and they're on the same network, I can rule out my own internet being the problem. All the Xiaoyi speakers fail, but the Tmall Genie works perfectly fine. I still haven't pinpointed the exact reason why. If anyone understands this, please feel free to leave a comment. But for now, I'm just sharing my personal experience, not trying to badmouth any brand or anything.
Maybe I didn't set something up correctly, but you're definitely playing favorites. What I actually want to say is that the smart speaker as a primary entry point never really took off. The narrative before was that we could access most services and even shop through smart speakers. Amazon, for example, really pushed that idea. But to this day, even if, say, the issues you just mentioned were resolved, it's still primarily just for controlling smart home devices, right? This applies whether it's smart driving or the things Xiaodu is working on. These two paths were pursued for just over a year. Then, on the 18th of May 2018, Baidu suddenly announced that Qi Lu would step down as president and COO starting in July, citing personal and family reasons. He would only retain the honorary title of vice chairman of the group. Baidu's stock immediately plunged 10%, wiping out $10 billion in market value. At that point, the media had even more speculations. A prevalent theory among many media outlets was that his aggressive reforms had disturbed deeply entrenched interests within the company, leading to his ousting. Of course, there were also urban legends, like Qi Lu being so shocked by the proportion of medical ads in Baidu's core business that he left overnight, fearing for his reputation. That's an urban legend, but it certainly relates to some underlying factors, and it's probably not a single cause. We can't fully uncover the complete truth. Although Qi Lu was given the number 2 position, a very important point is that when leading a battle, what are the two most critical powers? Personnel authority and financial authority. Qi Lu never had either, both remained with Robin Li. He Longxiang was later considered the executive who had the most severe conflicts with Qi Lu, so it was believed Qi Lu was forced out by He Longxiang. However, He Longxiang himself left the following year. This was a great pity and left everyone very disappointed with Baidu's organizational culture. You put in all that effort, elevated him to such a high position, invited him to be the COO, only for it to be a revolving door of executives, with Robin Li as the constant. This feeling became even more deeply ingrained. We also discussed this phenomenon last time. You can compare it, for example, with Alibaba's partner team. While there might be some adjustments every few years, the changes are generally minor, with core figures always remaining part of the team. Tencent is even more stable. Besides Pony Ma, Zhang Jidong, Liu Zhiping, Ren Yuxin, Alan Zhang, these are all long-term partners. We've never even heard of any minor disagreements among them. It's a group that makes collective decisions. But regarding these people, Baidu, no. Looking back at Baidu, it seems mainly because I'm still a bit embarrassed to say he's personally in charge. I've even heard from friends who used to work at Baidu that many core meetings are now held at his home. It's mainly him and his wife, Ma Dongmin, making decisions as a couple. When you think about that scenario, it just feels like it's hard to explain in a few words. Let's delve deeper into Baidu's AI. Many media outlets now describe Baidu as an early mover, but a late bloomer. How early did Baidu invest in AI? In 2013, Baidu's Institute of Deep Learning, IDL, was established. Among internet companies, not just in China but globally, it was the earliest AI research institute. In 2014, Andrew Ng joined and established Baidu Brain, modeled after Google Brain. Baidu has always prioritized R&D, and it's not just talk. They consistently allocate 20% of their revenue to R&D, which is a very high proportion. Most internet companies rarely have such high figures. In 2017, the autonomous driving platform Apollo was also among the first to enter the industry, and Xiaodu speakers were among the earliest smart speakers. As for large model capabilities, they weren't the earliest, but their capability reserves are among the best. Looking at it today, Xiaodu speakers don't seem to have the same influence as before. Apollo seems relatively okay, but it faces a lot of competition. Large models, even more so, make people feel like Baidu is a chaser. Initially, everyone had the most confidence in Baidu, believing it would be China's GPT. But now, people feel it's not completely out of the race, but they don't see it as a leader. However, if we look at the specifics, it's clear they're not particularly far behind. For example, Apollo's scale is still very large, and it's generally considered to hold the top spot in intelligent driving in China. In July and August 2025, Apollo successively formed strategic partnerships with Uber and Lyft, deploying thousands of its autonomous vehicles on Uber and Lyft platforms in Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Also, some friends might not know this, but RoboRun was very popular before, and RoboRun is Baidu's.
Everyone should know this, right?
Some friends might not know because it was promoted in Wuhan. It's Baidu's, so they might not be aware, might not know. As of August 2025, RoboRun has cumulatively provided over 14 million rides globally. This quarter alone, it completed over 2.2 million fully autonomous rides, a year-on-year increase of 150%. The cost of the 6th-generation autonomous vehicle has been reduced to 200,000 RMB, a significant 60% decrease compared to the 5th-generation model. Furthermore, the company has set a clear profitability timeline, achieving break-even in Wuhan by the end of 2024 and full profitability by 2025. Coming back to Wenxin Yan, as a large model, it's not always at the top of the rankings, but it's generally considered to be in the first tier. As for its commercial product, the Qianfan large model platform, it had over 150,000 enterprise clients as of June 2025, so you can't say it has completely fallen behind. Therefore, the overall development of AI makes people feel, how should I put it? In summary, Baidu is doing quite well, but people's expectations were that Baidu should be doing even better. I think this might be a more balanced statement reflecting the general perception that from the very beginning, the momentum was aimed at being the best. Also, I'd like to add that some analyses I've seen, which I think are worth quoting, suggest that Qilu's contribution has been somewhat mythologized because he left at his peak. This makes people think that Baidu's current struggles are due to Qilu's departure, wondering what would have happened if he had stayed. But
It's related to this.
But in reality, Baidu hasn't completely disregarded the broad direction set by Qilu as if he left and the tea went cold. Baidu's current path is still largely consistent with the strategic direction Qilu established back then. It's possible that even when Qilu was still there, the current organizational capability issues might have existed because ultimately, it's not just one person's problem. It's not a one-man show. Of course, this is a historical perspective that cannot be fully traced back and we don't know the exact truth. This is just one point of view. Let's move on to the final chapter, the 5th chapter, looking back at the long road. First, let's look back at Baidu's various products. In fact, what we've mentioned so far is just the tip of the iceberg if you count the number of products. These are just its main products. It has also developed many other products. In 2011, Baidu reached an agreement with the Music Copyright Society of China, essentially resolving copyright issues. Before that, wasn't Baidu MP3 full of pirated music? At that time, it launched Baidu Music. In 2018, it was renamed Qianqian Music, because Baidu acquired Qianqian Jingting in 2006, which had long been under Baidu's umbrella. Qianqian Jingting was indeed good, but Baidu Music, like Baidu Video, saw its market share carved up by other products after the copyright era arrived. Tracing back further, in 2006, Baidu launched Baidu Space, a personal blog. We mentioned it briefly before, I used it quite a lot. In 2012, Baidu Space was rebranded as a microblog, essentially trying to compete with Weibo, but its popularity declined, and it was shut down in 2015. In 2008, Baidu launched Baidu Hi, aiming to compete with QQ. But as everyone knows, with QQ's strong network effect, no one could beat it, not just Baidu. Baidu Hi later transitioned into an internal communication tool, similar to NetEase Popo. Also in 2008, Baidu launched Baidu Yua, which some friends might still remember as its e-commerce platform. A lot of effort and time was put into promoting it. Alongside Baidu Yo, Baifubao was also launched. This was essentially Baidu launching its own Taobao and Alipay. Baidu Yo didn't succeed, but Baifubao survived. In 2013, it was renamed Baidu Wallet, and in 2018, it was spun off and is no longer an internal Baidu product, renamed Du Xiaoman. Baidu can be considered a major shareholder, but it's now an independent brand. Of course, Du Xiaoman currently has significant influence and is considered a leading internet finance company in the tier after Ant and Tencent. In 2010, Baidu and Rakuten, Japan's largest e-commerce company, announced the formation of a joint venture to jointly build a B2C online shopping mall called Rakuten. But that initiative never went anywhere. It felt like Baidu wanted to do everything back then. In 2009, Baidu launched Baidu Wenku, which many friends still use today. It includes various types of materials such as teaching resources, exam question banks, professional writing materials, legal documents, and more, covering various fields. Users can trade using a points system, upload to earn points, download to spend points. Of course, you can also pay to download. However, Wenku has long been plagued by copyright issues, which we won't elaborate on here. In 2010, Baidu launched Baidu Shuoba, which was also a Weibo-like website. We probably mentioned this briefly before. In 2010, Baidu launched Baidu Experience. This is very similar to Baidu Knows, but it emphasizes a knowledge community. Because it's experience, it focuses more on specific steps to solve problems, somewhat like RedNote. In fact, if you search for something today, for example, how to back up WeChat on Baidu, you'll mostly find answers provided by Baidu Experience.
That thing is Baidu Experience. People might subconsciously categorize it with Baidu Knows, but it's a separate product.
In 2011, Baidu invested in Qunar, becoming its largest shareholder. In 2015, Trip acquired Qunar, which meant Baidu primarily became a shareholder and no longer deeply influenced the online travel industry. Around 2011, Baidu launched Baidu Player, which I used a lot back then. It was a product very similar to Kuaibo, and it was very popular, especially when piracy was rampant. People could just open Baidu Player and watch many different videos online, which was very convenient. It was one of those stream while downloading services. Its influence was quite significant at the time. But later, Kuaibo ran into problems, didn't it? Its founder was sentenced, and Baidu Player also exited the historical stage. In 2011, Baidu also launched Yi Platform, which sounded like a trading platform. It was actually a mobile operating system. Baidu wanted to do everything. It wanted to create an Android-like system, thinking Google made Android, so can I. At that time, suddenly getting into this, the timing was actually reasonable, just a little bit late. But in terms of capabilities and corporate DNA, it wasn't a good match. The entire company wouldn't invest too heavily in this area either. In 2011, Baidu acquired a product called Motu Jingling, incubated by Innovation Works, and renamed it Photo Wonder. I wonder if you remember it. I don't remember it very well. Not at all. Back then, it was quite popular. What did Photo Wonder do? Whitening, skin smoothing, blemish removal, eye enlargement, face slimming, body slimming. So early in 2011, it was essentially Meitu Xiuxiu. Back then, there was no Meitu Xiuxiu. Photo Wonder was the Meitu Xiuxiu of its time. I don't know if it was founded earlier than Meitu Xiuxiu, but when these features were discussed, people only knew Photo Wonder, not Meitu Xiuxiu. Within a year of its launch, it already had tens of millions of users. In 2013, Photo Wonder rapidly gained users through viral spread on WeChat Moments, thanks to a feature it launched called PK Daka. What did it do? It let you test how much you resembled a celebrity. Even today, this isn't entirely outdated. I still see some products, especially on short video platforms, occasionally promoting similar activities or filters. It became incredibly popular then, with user numbers skyrocketing tenfold, truly becoming a household app. But later, if you think about it, it's understandable that within Baidu, this wouldn't be a major or highly valued business. Coupled with the rise of Meitu Xiuxiu and the then popular Faceu, Photo Wonder gradually faded from the scene. In 2012, Baidu launched Baidu WebDrive. This is very important. It was very early, and many people use it. It was one of China's earliest Dropbox-like products. Within 2 months of its launch, it had over 10 million users. This was a high-demand product. Back then, people still really needed cloud storage for their files or to transfer things. When it was first launched, it was called Baidu Cloud. But in 2016, it was renamed Baidu WebDrive because that year, Baidu launched its own cloud service, and that name was then given to Baidu Cloud. It's the same logic as NetEase Cloud. Now there's NetEase Cloud and NetEase Cloud Music, which are also two separate products. In 2013, Baidu partnered with Kaspersky to launch Baidu Antivirus, directly competing with 360, Kingsoft, and Tencent PC Manager. Building on Baidu Antivirus, Baidu Guard was launched in 2015. This was briefly mentioned earlier and later became a core component of its animation business. In 2014, after Baidu acquired 91's business, it integrated 91's game distribution operations with its other ventures to form Baidu Games. Baidu Games spent a long time developing, but later, for various reasons, partly due to not obtaining publishing licenses, it was sold to a web company in 2017 for 1.2 billion RMB. This was a rather unsuccessful venture. Around 2013, Baidu launched Baidu Reader, which focused on online literature or digital reading. In 2014, Baidu Literature was established, integrating acquired resources like Zhongheng Chinese Network, Duoku Bookstore, and 91 Panda Reader. Some of these products might still be familiar to people. They were all integrated. In 2016, as mentioned earlier, it was sold to Perfect World. I actually have some sentiment for Baidu Reader. I earned some pocket money by writing things on it early on. How did you make money there? By publishing digital works. You could directly sell your own books. The whole book, right? Yes, you could also start a column. In 2014, Baidu launched Baidu Scholar, similar to Google Scholar, for collecting papers, academic journals, and so on. In 2014, Baidu launched Baidu Browser, but it stopped maintenance after 5 years. It didn't really last very long, even though it was quite popular back then. In 2014, Baidu launched Zuoyebang internally, which later became independent and is now known as Zuoyebang. Some people today might not even know that Zuoyebang was created by Baidu. Before the double reduction policy, Zuoyebang was one of the two giants in online education, alongside Yuanfudao. Another similar independent venture was a website for playing high-definition, legitimate videos incubated internally by Baidu in 2010. It was called Kui, founded by Gong Yu, and renamed IQIYI in 2011, later becoming independent. I remember the Kui era. The website was just kui.com, and later, I was added. We'll save these stories about online video for another time. We definitely don't have the space today. In 2018, Baidu established the Baidu Quantum Computing Institute, a very hardcore research institution. Over 80% of its core team members held PhDs from universities like Cambridge, Hong Kong University, Tsinghua University, Peking University, and so on. The latest news is that in 2024, Baidu decided to withdraw from quantum computing R&D and donated all its assets to the Beijing Academy of Quantum Information Sciences. In 2020, Baidu did another thing. Baidu Hai was reopened to the public, renamed Ruliu, aiming to be like Feishu. Many things, this news wasn't widely reported at the time, but they did a lot. It felt like a very temporary decision with no real follow-up. Clearly, this wasn't something the group highly valued. In 2020, Baidu announced the acquisition of YY Live. At one point, the acquisition was halted, and there were some legal disputes. When did it finally happen? This year, by the end of February 2025, an agreement was finally reached to acquire YY's business for $2.1 billion. This acquisition actually had some historical context. At that time, they were still in fierce direct competition with ByteDance. The landscape today is completely different, but the acquisition still went through. After this acquisition, the 1.9 billion acquisition of 91Zhushou back then was no longer their largest acquisition. In 2021, Baidu prepared to build cars, forming a joint venture with Geely called Jidu. It's a pretty simple name. I originally thought Jidu meant Geely Baidu, but then I looked it up and Jidu means Ji from Jihei collection, implying a company that brings together the best of Baidu's AI capabilities. When people heard Jidu, they'd say, I've never heard of it. In 2022, it was renamed Jiyue, which people might have heard of. After Jiyue encountered various financial problems, Baidu and Geely actually tried to manage it, but after seeing the books, they really didn't want to deal with it anymore and eventually abandoned it in phases.
Speaking of which, people felt both were falling behind, which led to a situation where there really wasn't a primary party responsible.
Ultimately, it fell through. And as we mentioned earlier, Baidu's overall strategic direction leans more towards building an ecosystem. If they were to build a car themselves, they wouldn't be able to leverage many of their core advantages. Their focus is more on applying intelligent technology to empower that ecosystem. All the products I've mentioned so far are relatively significant. But Baidu also developed a myriad of other smaller products such as Baidu Dictionary, Baidu Travel, Baidu Talent, Baidu Shenbian, Baidu Xingji, Baidu Desktop, Baidu Suoping, Baidu Voice Assistant, Baidu Game Hall, Baidu Leju, Baidu Lewan, Baidu Xiaba, Baidu Wenka, and Baidu Pai. Essentially, they would imitate almost anything available on the market, and some of these were likely very short-term experiments.
How should I put it? We were just discussing the so-called ByteDance model or Pinduoduo model. In reality, everyone is doing something similar. It's just not always as apparent, right?
Another point is their international expansion. Baidu also ventured into global markets. In 2006, Baidu Japan was established, launching a search engine there. They launched in 2015, entered Egypt in 2011, launched in 2017, entered Brazil in 2014, and Thailand in 2016. None of these really made a big splash later on. The internationalization direction probably gradually ceased to be a major focus for them. However, there was a period when they were actually very successful internationally. I had to dig quite a bit to find this information, and it's quite interesting. Between 2013 and 2016, in emerging markets like Southeast Asia, South America, and the Middle East, Baidu developed a wave of tool matrix products. They self-developed and acquired a bunch of tools. This was because, at that time, Baidu had quite rich experience in mobile development. What did these include? For example, Do Battery Saver, which was called Dianxin Shengdian in China, Do Speed Booster Android Optimizer, and a rather well-known one called ES-File Explorer. I used that one all the time when I had an Android phone. All of these, I didn't even know they were Baidu's. They were all independent.
It wasn't integrated into one single platform.
It's a tool matrix, as I just mentioned, so they were all independent. Yes, they were all developed as standalone products back then.
So it feels like a single mobile assistant could have encompassed all of them, right?
Back then, this approach was definitely more reasonable. If I developed them separately, whether it was for growth or user stickiness, if one got taken down, wouldn't that be even worse? And they didn't really have a one-size-fits-all effect on each other. Many mobile assistants probably included these features, right?
From what I remember, mobile assistants later became quite comprehensive, right?
Anyway, combined, there were hundreds of millions of users overseas at the time, but these tools were also part of a transitional period. Why isn't the mobile assistant market even today a big one anymore? That's because various mobile manufacturers tightened their grip, completely restricting access. Google Play, iOS App Store, and similar platforms, all these policies became stricter. Smartphone operating systems themselves also became very comprehensive in their features, so this market essentially ceased to exist, right?
It's gone.
Speaking of Baidu's products, for most Chinese netizens, Baidu Tieba probably holds the most emotional significance. Regarding Baidu Tieba, we need to talk a bit more about how it declined. The 2016 incident was, of course, a pretty fatal blow. But then in 2019, something else happened. In May, users discovered that all posts on Baidu Tieba from before the 1st of January 2017 were no longer viewable. All those posts from before 2017, which were the vast majority of Baidu Tieba's best and most valuable content, simply showed unavailable. Baidu officially stated it was system maintenance. After a long period of maintenance, it finally reopened, but when it did, people found that a huge amount of content was gone. This sparked outrage among netizens. Many said, "This is the burning of books and burying of scholars. This is the burning of the Library of Alexandria." This was a generation's memory for Chinese netizens. The things accumulated there were priceless, and just like that, they were gone. What was behind this incident? We don't know if it was due to regulatory pressure or if Baidu genuinely had some data loss issues. But this incident certainly accelerated Tieba's decline. Many people left, thinking, "My writings will be invisible in the future. What you've done is too disheartening." So people dispersed, going to Zhihu, Douban, Rednote, Weibo. There were plenty of other places to go. Moreover, Baidu Tieba starting around 2018 to 2019 began to have more and more ads. The information flow became heavily polluted. Often, the articles and posts we saw had no comments, they were just bot-generated posts, making the platform feel desolate. Tieba faced similar problems to other early products. It became a platform where content only went out, with no significant new content growth. People who wanted to post wouldn't even think of going to Tieba anymore. Speaking of Baidu Tieba memories, didn't we mention the snow in Long Island in the last episode? Many friends in the comments also brought up another legendary post called 7 Years I Still Miss You. I specifically went and looked it up. It's too long to introduce here. I found it very touching when I read it, and it reminded me of my own university life. Xiaolei knows that during my junior and senior years of undergrad, I rented a place off campus. Whether it was my girlfriend at the time or many good buddies, Xiaolei even stayed at my place. A lot of things happened there.
My girlfriend wasn't living there when I was.
That kind of rented apartment life, you feel a special fondness for it. How to describe it? Everyone just hung out together, doing nothing in particular, just playing around all day. It was a really happy time that I often look back on.
That last period of time when there wasn't much pressure.
And speaking of that, I'd like to take this opportunity to recommend one of my favorite radio dramas that I listened to back then. It was produced by Zhejiang Radio and called Let Youth Continue. It was quite popular on Tieba at the time, and I really loved listening to it. If I listen to it today, I might find some values that are worth criticizing, but looking back, many of the storylines and campus tales were very moving. It's a show that left a deep impression on me. Some of you might have heard of it. We've talked quite a bit about Baidu's products, but there's one more I want to mention, Baidu Snapshot. It's gone today. Baidu Snapshot was completely taken offline in 2022, and that caused a lot of controversy at the time. See, even Xiaolei doesn't know about it now. The discontinuation of Baidu Snapshot doesn't just mean we can't use certain features anymore. It means that Baidu, as a living archive of the Chinese internet, no longer exists in that capacity. All the old web pages are gone. If it's a 404, if the server is no longer maintained, you'll never be able to open it again.
Confirmed, it's really gone. I remember seeing some links in Baidu Baike, for example, some snapshots not long ago. Maybe they weren't Baidu's. Now that you mention it, I'm a bit confused.
Many crucial historical records of the Chinese internet now rely solely on public welfare projects for maintenance. Baidu failed to maintain them, which is quite regrettable. The internet truly has no memory. Regarding Baidu, I want to bring up one last point, the issue of organizational culture. Organizational culture has always been a major problem area for Baidu, frequently leading to public relations crises. In 2016, there was an incident that, while less impactful than the Zexi Wei case, was still quite well known in the internet industry. In July 2016, at the International Experience Design Conference in Beijing, numerous globally renowned designers attended. For example, Uber's global product design director, Microsoft's chief designer and vice president, people of that caliber, as well as GE's chief user experience officer, all participated. Baidu sent a guy named Liu Chao, who was Baidu's user experience director. When he got on stage, people eventually even shouted for him to get off. It was just too lowbrow. First, his PowerPoint presentation was terrible. This was a design conference, and as a design leader, his own PPT layout wasn't even aligned properly. It was a plain blue background with images and text simply pasted on it, and the text wasn't even left aligned. In the middle of his presentation, the jokes he made were extremely vulgar. At one point, he put up 4 photos of female team members on the PPT and said, "Look, aren't they beauties? Do we only hire beauties for our team?" No, they were ugly before they came here. They joined our team and we infected them, turning them into beauties. Everyone was stunned at the time, wondering what he was talking about. It wasn't just irrelevant to design, it was utterly vulgar. Later, he told several more crude jokes, not just vulgar, but truly lowbrow. I won't elaborate on them here, but in any case, it caused a huge uproar at the time.
I think I vaguely remember that.
Everyone was discussing how Baidu ended up like this. Liu Chao was, of course, later fired. People also debated whether it was an isolated incident. Because Baidu certainly has many very talented and excellent designers. But for him to appear as a director at such a design conference still makes people question what exactly is going on with Baidu's organizational structure. What is really happening? Another incident occurred last year, in May, when a Baidu executive named Ku Jing posted a short video on Douyin. That incident also generated a lot of controversy, including her saying things like, "An employee broke up with their partner and wanted to resign, and I instantly approved it." Such remarks went viral. This Ku Jing incident, according to media reports, caused Baidu's market value to evaporate by over 10 billion RMB. Ku Jing, of course, later resigned. Media reports stated that Robin Li and Kui Shanshan, one of the 7 swordsmen we mentioned earlier, who is still at Baidu as the head of HR, held a small communication meeting with core employees to comment on the matter. At that time, Robin Li emotionally stated, "You are the ones who represent Baidu. You are the ones who represent the true Baidu. You are the true representatives of Baidu." How should I put it? What exactly did he want to express with that statement? I don't know what he wanted to express. I'll share my thoughts. When we tell business stories, we rarely express opinions, especially negative ones about individuals. But at this point, I can't help myself. I always feel that Mr. Li has a somewhat avoidant personality. When faced with a situation where a vice president you personally hired behaves this way, your logic for explaining it is to say, he's a bad person, he did poorly, but you all are good, so you represent Baidu. Isn't that just avoidance? Clearly, there's a problem with the organizational culture if such a vice president was selected. If he could become a vice president, it's obviously because the organizational culture clearly has issues. You can understand it with this line of reasoning. It's like a couple arguing. You bring up the issue of not washing dishes today, and I say, didn't I put my heart into pursuing you back then? I did. These are completely different things. You should still think about why he was able to reach that position. You can't just say, I don't have good employees. Isn't that just me constantly emphasizing my good side and completely avoiding my mistakes?
I understand what you're trying to say.
Friends I know who left Baidu have various complaints, but there's a common consensus. Baidu's culture is heavily influenced by its top leader. Whether it's a lack of security, structural issues, or other problems, there are many theories. But at this stage of the company's development, the leader's role is still crucial. You can't blame executives, you can't blame employees, and you can't blame the whole world for being against you. It really feels strongly connected to the top leader's personality. Personality is definitely inescapable. I heard a rather strong opinion that can serve as a reference, though not everyone has to believe it entirely. I saw it on Douyin from a former Baidu employee. Let's listen to what Xiaolei has to say.
Baidu always seems to start strong but end weak. As a former employee of 8 years, I've thought about this countless times. But every time, after much deliberation, I always come back to the boss himself. My final conclusion is that I believe Mr. Li lacks the leadership qualities required for a company of this scale. His work in selecting, employing, and retaining talent isn't good. Early Baidu was full of talent. Except for Zhansheng Wang, who was an exception, many famous people like Jun Yu left. So, within Baidu, there was a distinct lack of someone who could work with Robin Li, yet also challenge him, discuss things openly and equally, and even dare to argue with him. After the early stages, by the time I joined Baidu, it was the era of e-commerce wars and O2O battles. What was Baidu doing then? Infighting. For example, Hai Longxiang launched Duzhan and Mingyuan Li launched Zhidao. Both had similar business models and they clashed almost to the point of fighting. In the end, the former company heavily promoted Zhidao, but both failed to make it work. Mingyuan Li was then ousted. Later, Qilu came, but left after only half a year. The reason for his departure wasn't announced, but many colleagues speculated it was related to internal conflicts. His reform efforts at the time were too drastic, causing various interest groups to band together and ignore him. Then, less than 2 months after he left, Hai Longxiang, who seemed firmly entrenched, was also ousted. The person who took over was Shen Du. When he was a director, people nicknamed him God of Fighting. At this point, the company's internal situation stabilized a bit, but the external market landscape had largely settled, with no new opportunities. When the top fights, the lower ranks naturally follow suit. It became more about choosing sides than doing good work. If you were someone who just did your work and didn't pick sides, you wouldn't get promoted or fired, you'd just be used for your labor. And with constant infighting, things would never settle down. There were organizational structure adjustments every few days. Since there was infighting, those below would compete to see who could boast the most or deceive the best. Honestly, in that environment, it was normal for nothing to get done. It would have been a miracle if something did. You could bring any successful person from outside into that environment, and they wouldn't be able to achieve anything. So, as the boss, he ultimately failed in his job. He couldn't retain people, and he couldn't properly mediate conflicts between his direct subordinates. The result was that his subordinates couldn't form a cohesive force. Not only that, but they also undermined each other, making it difficult to even advance normal business operations. They could only complete revenue KPIs that were of common interest to the executives, often for inflated prices. If Mr. Li were an ordinary person, his personality would absolutely not be a problem. It wouldn't even be considered a minor flaw. But unfortunately, he is a boss with tens of thousands of subordinates. Many people's intelligence is no less than his, and this is the extremely competitive Chinese internet industry, where everyone is fiercely ambitious. So, it's quite normal for things not to keep up. Of course, Baidu's foundation is still very strong. While the executives might be third-rate internationally, many employees, especially those doing the actual work, particularly in R&D, have almost reached first-rate international standards. It just depends on whether the boss can step up and seize the opportunity of this AI era.
This is a perspective offered by a former employee for everyone's reference. We always like to add one more thing.
These are all personal opinions, and they might not be entirely accurate. But what I want to say is that among the Baidu veterans I know, a significant number share the same perspective.
That probably explains some of the issues.
Robin Li's own decisions and strategic judgments are also frequently criticized. Sometimes the shifts are a bit too drastic. While it's common to have some changes in strategic direction, for example, at the World Artificial Intelligence Conference Roundtable Forum in July 2024, he stated that open sourcing large models was an IQ tax, and closed source models were more efficient. Those who pursued open source. At the time, those were the prevailing arguments. The crucial point is, just after saying that, half a year later, in February 2025, Baidu announced that it would successively launch the Wenshin Large Model 4.5 series in the coming months and officially open source it on June 30th. Of course, this was influenced by DeepSeek. You could say that being willing to admit mistakes is fine, but it gives people the impression that they, how should I put it, haven't been particularly consistent on one path. Since around 2009 to 2010, they've largely been a follower. This might be related to the giant mountain theory we mentioned earlier. Speaking of the organization, let's also add a couple of points. Currently, it's not that Baidu hasn't seen core figures leaving one after another. Haifeng Wang has taken over as the flag bearer for Baidu's AI business and leads the core business team. He became Baidu's long-vacant CTO in 2019. Professor Haifeng Wang is the first Chinese chairman in the history of the ACL International Computational Linguistics Association. He's an alumnus of Harbin Institute of Technology and previously worked at Microsoft Research Asia. Another key figure is Shen Dou, who is responsible for the entire mobile ecosystem business group. You can think of him as the head of various business products. Haifeng Wang handles internal affairs, while Shen Dou handles external affairs. That's the dynamic. The biggest organizational challenge right now might still be retaining talent. Baidu can still attract, as the guy in the video just mentioned, some truly top-tier technical talent. But these technical talents, how should I put it, they leave. He just said something very important. It's better to pick a side than to work hard. So many people might feel that once they've gained experience there, they'll go develop elsewhere, or find another boss. Let me give an example that many friends might not know. SRPEC is the company behind Cloud. Cloud is now one of the top AI products globally. Its co-founder and CEO, Dario Amodei, after getting his PhD in the US, his first job was at Baidu. Can you imagine? He worked at Baidu for several years, then left to start his own company. Baidu still has the ability to recruit brilliant people, but it lacks the ability to retain brilliant people. In January this year, during Baidu's 25th anniversary, Robin Li's internal email was also criticized by many, especially the last sentence he wrote. Thank you to every colleague for your loyal companionship to Baidu's mission. This emphasis on loyalty made many people quite uncomfortable and made them ponder why he values loyalty so much. Now, regarding the numbers, let's quickly go over Baidu's current situation. Looking at the Q2 2025 financial report, Baidu's total revenue reached 32.7 billion. Baidu's core revenue is 26.3 billion. What is Baidu's core revenue? It's excluding IQIYI's financial report. This is reflected in the overall financial report. Out of 26.3 billion in revenue, online advertising accounts for 16.2 billion, a very significant 15% drop. This is the largest decline in recent years. Online advertising and AI new business revenue performed exceptionally well, already surpassing 10 billion. This is higher than I expected. Online advertising at 16.2 billion and AI new business already at 10 billion? Is it growing that fast? It's a year-on-year increase of 34%. I believe most people probably wouldn't have guessed this. That is, putting aside all the controversies we just mentioned, objectively speaking, Baidu's second growth curve, purely from a financial standpoint, has already taken off. It's not what everyone imagines, that Baidu is still a so-called Putin-style company today. After this financial report was released, the market reaction was slightly pessimistic, with a 1.44% drop that day because it fell short of expectations. Looking at the financial report, there's another figure. Baidu Search's monthly active users in June reached 735 million, which is equivalent to half the nation, as we just mentioned, and it's still growing by 5%. Xiaolei also found this quite surprising earlier. This is also quite impressive, still growing. In July, the proportion of AI-generated content in mobile search results pages increased from 35% in April to 64%. This is what Baidu officially stated. How should we interpret this? Now, when we search web pages, it's essentially like conversing with Wenxing Yiyan, which summarizes some conclusions for you. These numbers certainly look good, but they also raise some questions, because the growth in users comes from interest in AI, not from a demand for search. AI searching for information and AI presenting results itself will face long-term problems, just like the problems Google faces. First, if in the future all content is provided and integrated by AI, who will create content? Those creators and website owners, including those on Baijiahao, will have very little motivation. Who would be willing to produce content? And second, which is also very important, how will the money be distributed? This is also very vague. If in the future, all these platforms that provide information bypass the original sources and present content directly through AI, then it's the problem we mentioned earlier. Consumer behavior happens during the conversation with AI, and ultimately, all traffic is hijacked by you. For those who provide content, this is not necessarily a good thing.
Of course, this isn't a problem that only Baidu is currently facing.
Google will also face this problem, and there's another layer to it, the business model. It's not just for creators, for platforms. If all results are AI generated, then what about your ad placements? You clearly won't have any ad slots. And if you say, I'll insert ads into the AI presented results, then what about the issue of fairness? These are actually the most crucial long-term problems for AI search, and they've been consistently debated within the industry.
Recently, there have indeed been rumors that certain AI platforms are deliberately inserting content into the network.
Dubao and Yuanbao can actually direct users to their own product matrix. Let's take a look at the 2024 financial report. Currently, Revenue stands at 133.1 billion, with a net profit of 23.8 billion, a year-on-year increase of 21%. The net profit growth is quite good. Compared to the past, the overall performance isn't as volatile as I'd imagined. I always had the impression that Baidu was up and down, but actually the overall trend shows consistent growth.
It's simply the difference in growth rate compared to others, right?
In 2005, its revenue was over 300 million. By 2008, it hit 3.4 billion. In 2012, it was over 20 billion. In 2015, over 60 billion. In 2018, it broke past 100 billion. In 2021, it was over 120 billion. In 2023, it was over 130 billion, and it remains over 130 billion today. So, it's actually been growing quite rapidly. However, what I just discussed was revenue. Another angle is profit. The changes in profit haven't been as dramatic as revenue. The historical peak for profit was 2018, when it reached 27.5 billion. Back in 2012, its profit was already over 10 billion. By 2018, it had grown to nearly 3 times, more than double, but it's since remained stagnant at around 27 billion. It's been flatlining for quite some time. So, you see, in 2012, revenue was 22.3 billion, and profit was 10.5 billion, essentially earning half. Today, with over 130 billion in revenue, profit is just over 20 billion. Costs are steadily climbing. It's a very different situation, right? As Xiaolei mentioned, a lot of those costs are sunk into AI bets. From 2015 to 2024, over a decade, Baidu's R&D investment totaled 181.5 billion. That's an enormous amount of investment.
Over 180 billion.
The current skepticism from shareholders towards Baidu stems from the fact that you've been investing for 10 years.
It's already been 10 years.
And it's over 180 billion. Over 180 billion. What about its utilization rate? In the long run, it's not that people don't believe in the future of AI, it's whether Baidu's utilization rate is high enough, right? It's truly about long-term impact. Many people are already skeptical, right? Where did all that money go? Let's look at the market cap. Which year was Baidu's market cap at its peak? Take a guess.
Then it's 2018.
Around 2021.
Still 3 years off.
Regarding market value, it basically surpassed 50 billion in 2011, reached 100 billion in 2019, and 120 billion in 2021. Now it fluctuates around the 50 billion range. Why was 2021 the peak? That year, there were high hopes due to the bull market and the AI craze. In 2022, it plummeted to 30 billion, a very low point due to reasons like US-China relations. By 2025, it returned to the 45 to 50 billion range, fluctuating there. How to put it? Currently, Baidu isn't a company everyone has high expectations for. As a tech company, what's its TTM PE ratio, its dynamic PE ratio? Xiaolei, take a guess.
If you calculate it that way, I'd give it less than 10, not even 10, an 8. I'm sure most people don't know this, but in our dialect, 8 is sometimes pronounced as ba.
What you just said resonates with me even more strongly, especially regarding our user experience. Every time I can't remember. I was just thinking about this 8 thing 2 minutes ago when it came out, and now I've forgotten again. Think about the number 8. If you're someone who invests regularly, you'll realize that 8 is a truly brutal number. If a company can earn back its entire market value in 8 years based on its current profitability, that means people are really pessimistic about it. With such low investor confidence, Baidu needs to show more determination. As Xiaolei said, on another level, Baidu is indeed growing in various aspects. But the problem is that the development of China's internet over the past decade or so has been a case of no progress means regression. Baidu has essentially been treading water. What about Tencent? Over 500 billion. Alibaba is over 200 billion. ByteDance isn't listed, but it's clearly in the first tier, probably on par with Tencent, with a market cap in the hundreds of billions. Then there's Pinduoduo, Meituan, NetEase. Baidu has been pushed behind all of them, almost into the third tier. Recently, people often said that after Tencent TME acquired Himalaya, its market value already surpassed Baidu's. Now, compare that to Alibaba and Tencent. Of course, these two companies also face various criticisms, and indeed, many of their businesses haven't performed exceptionally well. But if you look back and compare them to Baidu, consider Alibaba Cloud, Alibaba's payment system which later became Ant Group, Tencent's gaming, Tencent's payment system, and so on. These second and even third curves have been very successful. But Baidu's other curves, its AI curve, with an investment of over 180 billion, right? People still feel this investment is a bit vague. However, Alibaba and Tencent have already proven that their second leg in the mobile internet era is walking very well. Of course, to go back a step, saying Baidu has been eliminated isn't true. It's still a starved camel, still bigger than a horse. As a second or third tier internet company by market value, it's still relatively stable.
On one hand, the investment in AI hasn't shown efficiency. But on the other hand, there have been unexpected things, like the overall revenue mentioned earlier, which still offers hope.
Right? So, for a company as massive as Baidu, trying to give a concluding remark at the end here is quite difficult and a bit rushed. It's hard to sum it up in just a few sentences. Let's try to evaluate it in 3 sentences, just kidding. These are my very personal feelings. First, Baidu definitely has cultural issues, but that's just one aspect. There are also strategic problems, but again, that's just another aspect. Execution might also be an issue. Some of their initiatives started well, like Nuomi and their takeout service, and their mobile strategy initially had good momentum. But later, they failed to execute well, failed to implement them effectively, and turn them into meticulously operated core businesses. Then there are some decision-making problems, which also involve an element of luck. For example, they couldn't prevent the merger of Meituan and Dianping, and there was nothing they could do about that. They didn't acquire AutoNavi. That was also due to various reasons. But the question is, what if they had acquired it, right? Although even if they had, it might not have made much difference.
I don't know what their strategy was, but because they didn't acquire AutoNavi, it allowed AutoNavi to rise.
They also acquired 91Zhushou, but the market for 91Zhushou quickly disappeared a few years later. All these things, you could say there were some judgment issues, but looking back at that time, it's hard to say for sure. Organizational problems might also be the price of early success. This isn't about Robin Li's early success, but Baidu's as a whole. As one of the earliest representatives of BAT to ascend to the top spot, Baidu's innovation capability virtually vanished after Junyu left in 2009. Almost all subsequent products were either followers or imitators. Some, to use the giant mountain theory mentioned earlier, were developed only after seeing others make money and the market was almost saturated. At that point, it became more like a capital game, but they didn't seem to be very good at playing the capital game. This isn't the attitude of a product-focused company. The courage for reform also seemed insufficient. They couldn't retain Qilu. And as the guy before mentioned, there's also a very brutal side to the palace intrigue and so on. This also includes Google's withdrawal from China and the rapid rise of mobile internet. These were also caused by some objective factors by the overall environment, not by a single factor. Overall, I personally have a lot of affection for Baidu, especially its early products. I still really hope Baidu can make some new changes in the future. You ask if Baidu has a ticket for the arrival of the AI era? First, Baidu definitely has the opportunity to get a ticket. As for the future, let's wait and see.
Listening to all of this, sometimes I have some doubts. Let's take one example, what was just said about Qilu. What I gather from that is, the resolve in the initial phase was actually very strong. I'm willing to believe he recognized some issues and was prepared to fully delegate authority, empowering someone with a completely different approach to try new strategies. This is just my personal take, and I might be completely wrong, but anyone who hears this story will have their own experience. My perception is that a significant decision was indeed made. But it's very similar to this. Many other initiatives later on either weren't followed through, or fizzled out, or ultimately led nowhere. There must be some core reasons why that resolve wasn't seen through. As I said earlier, if you're determined to do something and do it well, it's entirely possible. But as a giant, having already succeeded in one area, the likelihood of developing a second or third growth curve with a clear understanding of needing to invest heavily is very low. However, it's not impossible for some to achieve it. And things like food delivery, which initially had a strong advantage, why did they later fizzle out for certain reasons? These to start strong but end weak situations are constantly occurring. Even now, after going all in on AI, it's still a to start strong but end weak scenario. Of course, it's not over yet, there's no definitive outcome, and it might still turn into a wave. But looking at past experiences, it makes one feel less confident, or rather, not so optimistic. If the previous decision-making pattern doesn't change, it's likely to repeat itself later. What exactly happened in between that makes it so hard to hear? That crucial point is always on my mind, but the final blow was never struck. Can that knife truly be pulled out? It's very frustrating. People still have hope. If you don't view it as an artificial construct, but as a company that once held so many of our memories and supported so many people, if it can succeed in the future, it wouldn't be a bad thing. And its so-called success means changing those disliked profit models, right? If it can discard them, perform it to scrape the poison off the bone, it wouldn't be a bad thing. But what's the path? I still think it's quite difficult, very difficult, yes.
Finally, to conclude, I'd like to bring in Mr. Robin Li from 2008. A small excerpt from his speech at Peking University's graduation ceremony that year will serve as today's ending. Please welcome him.
Many times, I feel that Baidu has been able to persist in search because I have an almost religious belief in focus. It's hard for ordinary people to imagine the sheer number of temptations a company with 200 million users faces every day. Baidu could have pursued 100 different things, but in the end, we chose just one. And we've been dedicated to it for 8 years, and we will continue to do so. The things a person can accomplish in a lifetime are limited. Only through focus can one become truly excellent. Therefore, to achieve something, you must...
We'll pretty much wrap things up here.
All right, thank you all.
That concludes Caffè Breve, episode 166. We'll see you next time.
You can subscribe and listen to Caffè Breve on Xiaoyuzhou. We also welcome you to share and forward our episodes. I'm this episode's producer, Nai Shu. See you next time.